You've been told to move on, to stay strong, to forgive, to forget. But no one ever taught you how to let go of the memories that still hurt, how to quiet the voice in your head that never stops, how to stop carrying pain that was never yours to hold. They told you time heals everything. But if that were true, why are the old wounds still so fresh? Why does the weight on your chest still feel heavier at night? Why do you still feel like something inside you is broken? The truth is, healing doesn't come from running away. It comes from letting go. Not by force, not by pretending, but by slowly loosening your grip until your heart no longer needs to fight. And this is where Buddhism comes in. Not as a religion, not as a rule book, but as a map back to yourself. For centuries, monks, sages, and seekers have followed these teachings to release suffering, to find peace in the chaos, to return to a stillness that's been there all along, buried beneath the noise. Tonight, you'll do the same. You won't just fall asleep, you'll let go of guilt, of anger, of stories that no longer serve you, and in their place, space, silence, a calm you may not have felt in years. As you listen to these teachings, something inside will shift. The past will lose its grip, the overthinking will fade, and a quiet kind of healing will begin. This isn't just background noise for bedtime, this is a turning point. Are you ready to release what's been holding you back? Then take a breath, and let's begin. 4-0. You said, rewrite horizontally and remember throughout. ChatGPT said, you've been told to move on, to stay strong, to forgive, to forget. But no one ever taught you how to let go of the memories that still hurt, how to quiet the voice in your head that never stops, how to stop carrying pain that was never yours to hold. They told you time heals everything. But if that were true, why are the old wounds still so fresh? Why does the weight on your chest still feel heavier at night? Why do you still feel like something inside you is broken? The truth is, healing doesn't come from running away. It comes from letting go, not by force, not by pretending, but by slowly loosening your grip until your heart no longer needs to fight. And this is where Buddhism comes in, not as a religion, not as a rule book, but as a map back to yourself. For centuries, monks, sages, and seekers have followed these teachings to release suffering, to find peace in the chaos, to return to a stillness that's been there all along, buried beneath the noise. Tonight, you'll do the same. You won't just fall asleep, you'll let go of guilt, of anger, of stories that no longer serve you. And in their place, space, silence, a calm you may not have felt in years. As you listen to these teachings, something inside will shift. The past will lose its grip, the overthinking will fade, and a quiet kind of healing will begin. This isn't just background noise for bedtime, this is a turning point. Are you ready to release what's been holding you back? Then take a breath, and let's begin. You've been holding on for so long, not just to people or things, but to thoughts, emotions, expectations, silent fears that wrap around your chest like a tightening rope. You've tried to let go before, maybe through distraction, maybe by telling yourself you're fine. But deep down, part of you still holds, still clings, still believes that if you just fix this one thing, you'll finally feel peace. But what if the very act of holding on is the reason you feel so tense, so tired? There's a different way to live, a way where the mind learns to rest, not because everything is perfect, but because it no longer needs to grip everything so tightly. This is the art of non-grasping, and it begins in the smallest places. It begins here. To understand what it means to truly let go, you must first see how you're grasping in the first place. And it's more subtle than you think. Grasping doesn't always look like obsession. It doesn't have to be loud or desperate. Often, it's quiet, gentle, a whisper of attachment, a tiny hope that this person, this plan, this feeling will last forever. A voice that says, "Don't change, stay, be mine." That voice is the seed of suffering. Not because wanting something is bad, but because clinging to it as if it could complete you always ends in pain. Life doesn't hold still. Thoughts come and go. Emotions rise and fall. People change. So when the mind insists on holding, it suffers the loss of what was never meant to stay. At the center of non-grasping is trust, not in people, not in plans, but in the present moment itself, in the flow of reality, in the breath that rises without effort, and the space that's always beneath the noise. The mind doesn't need to chase peace, it needs to stop strangling it, but we're not taught that. From an early age, we learn to grab attention, grab success, grab love, and once we get it, we tighten our grip, hoping it won't slip away. And yet, it always does. Everything we grasp wears out, fades, shifts form. Even the body changes, no matter how hard we try to control it. That's not a tragedy. That's the nature of all things. But when we resist that nature, when we grasp, it becomes suffering. To see this clearly, watch the mind, not with judgment, but with quiet curiosity. Notice how quickly it reaches for certainty, for control, for reassurance. Even in stillness, it clings to a narrative. I'm this kind of person. This is who I need to be. This is what I must do. Those identities seem harmless, but when we can't see them for what they are, mental stories, we mistake them for reality. We defend them. We suffer for them. We chase after ideas of happiness, not happiness itself. Non-grasping doesn't mean we stop caring. It doesn't mean we give up on effort or relationships or dreams. It means we stop tying our identity to the outcome. It means we can hold without squeezing. We can love without owning. We can try without demanding. It's not about detachment. It's about balance. Think of the mind like an open palm. When something beautiful comes, we let it rest there. We feel it, appreciate it, but we don't close the fist. We let it go when it goes. And when something painful appears, we don't push it away. We let it be. And when it passes, we don't chase it. Mental spaciousness comes from this way of being. It's not about emptying the mind. It's about creating room around each thought, each emotion, so they can rise and fall without crashing into each other. You can have a thought without believing it. You can feel something deeply and not be consumed by it. That's spaciousness. To train this quality, we return to awareness, again and again, not to control thoughts, but to see them as they are, temporary, empty of solidity. You might notice a craving arise. I need them to reply. I hope they like me. Instead of reacting, you watch. You feel the tightness, the pull, and you breathe. You don't follow it. You don't fight it. You simply rest with it. In that resting, grasping loosens. The thought fades. You remain. Over time, the grip of craving weakens. You begin to recognize its voice, not as truth, but as habit. The mind will say, "This is urgent. This matters more than anything." But you've learned its pattern. You smile gently, and you let the thought pass, like a cloud in a vast sky. There's a quiet strength in that, not a cold disinterest, but a soft, steady presence. You become less reactive, less tangled, and you begin to notice something surprising. Peace was never far away. It was just hidden beneath the noise of wanting. Sometimes people ask, but what about motivation? If I let go, won't I stop caring? But non-grasping doesn't kill motivation. It clarifies it. You still act. You still create. But from love, not fear. From clarity, not panic. You do what matters and let go of the rest. The results are no longer chains around your neck. They're ripples in a vast ocean. This way of living doesn't come overnight. It's not a switch you flip. It's a practice, a daily remembering, a soft return to center. You begin noticing when you tighten, when you reach, when you resist. And instead of judging it, you breathe, you soften, you create space, again and again. That space is healing. In it, pain can dissolve without being forced. Old wounds can breathe, thoughts can lose their grip. You stop trying to fix everything and start allowing what is. And in that allowing, there's freedom. You may notice that your anxiety starts to lose its edge, not because the world changed, but because your relationship to it did. You no longer need to control everything to feel okay. You learn to stay open in uncertainty, to find calm without needing the puzzle pieces to line up perfectly. Non-grasping also transforms relationships. It frees others from your expectations. You stop needing them to be different for you to be happy. You listen more, judge less, and you love more deeply, because you love from presence, not need. There's no, "I need you to complete me." There's only, "I see you, I care, and I give you space to be yourself." Even grief softens in the light of non-grasping. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes clean, not tangled with guilt or resistance. When someone or something we love leaves, the pain comes naturally, but when we don't cling, the pain flows. It moves, it teaches, and eventually it transforms. The same is true with anger. When we stop grasping at the idea that things should be different, we stop feeding the fire. We still act if needed. We still speak up. But the fuel is no longer reactivity. It's wisdom. This practice touches everything, even our thoughts about ourselves. When we grasp at identity, we limit who we can be. I'm not good enough. I always fail. These stories become prisons. But when you let go of the story, you open to growth, to change, to truth. Letting go of the need to be someone special allows you to just be, fully, authentically. That's where your power is, not in proving, but in presence. And you begin to notice the small moments again, the way sunlight feels on your skin, the quiet of early morning, the softness of your breath. When you're not busy chasing or clinging, life becomes vivid, alive. You start to trust the unfolding instead of fighting it. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy. Life still brings difficulty. But your relationship to difficulty changes. You stop adding mental suffering to the natural pain. You meet challenge with presence, not panic, with openness, not defense. And in that space, you begin to grow, not as someone trying to be better, but as someone becoming more whole, more grounded, more free. Non-grasping gives the mind rest, not by escaping life, but by meeting it fully, without needing it to be anything other than what it is. And in that meeting, healing happens, not from effort, but from release. So tonight, let the practice begin gently. You don't need to let go of everything all at once. Just notice. Notice where the mind grips. Notice where the breath feels tight. And soften. That's enough. Let yourself rest in the knowing that you don't need to hold so hard. You don't need to chase or fix or become someone else to be at peace. You only need to return to this breath, this moment, this space. And slowly, the grasping mind will begin to trust something deeper, something steadier, something that's been here all along, waiting patiently for you to come home. So you begin to soften, the grip loosens, the breath deepens. You no longer feel like you need to control every passing moment. For the first time in a long time, the mind is not chasing, it's watching. And in that watching, something else starts to reveal itself, an old pattern hidden beneath the grasping. Not the need to hold, but the need to fix. The constant whisper that says, "You're not there yet. You need to do more. You should be better than this by now." This voice doesn't shout. It quietly follows you. It sneaks into your meditation. It hides behind your goals. It even dresses itself in healing words like growth, transformation, becoming your best self. But what if that urge to always fix yourself is just another form of suffering? We don't talk about this enough. The burnout of becoming, the exhaustion of constantly needing to improve. It sounds noble, even responsible. But for many people, it becomes a trap. You start to believe that your worth is in your progress, that peace is only available after you change, that you can only rest once you've become the perfect version of yourself. But what if there is nothing wrong with you? This idea isn't easy to sit with, especially in a culture that rewards achievement and idealizes leveling up. You're told that happiness is at the top of the next hill, and so you climb, and then you climb again, and again, until you realize there is no top, only the pressure to keep going, always becoming, never being. This constant fixing can start to feel spiritual. You meditate to become more calm. You journal to become more healed. You read to become more wise. But somewhere in that process, the message becomes, "Who I am now isn't enough." That message is the wound. And the truth is, you don't heal a wound by rejecting it. True healing begins not with more doing, but with radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is not passive. It's not giving up. It's the courageous choice to meet yourself exactly where you are, with no agenda to change what is already here. You stop trying to push yourself into a better version. You stop waiting for permission to rest, and you start practicing something far more powerful, being on your own side. Because underneath the need to fix is often a deep self-rejection. Somewhere along the way, you learned that parts of you were unlovable. Maybe you were told to hide your emotions. Maybe you were rewarded only when you achieved. Maybe no one was there to remind you that it was okay to struggle. So you turned inwards and made it your mission to become someone worthy, someone stronger, calmer, smarter, more spiritual. But that mission often creates an inner war, a constant battle with the present version of you. Every flaw becomes an enemy, every setback a failure. And slowly, without noticing, you begin to live in constant self-criticism dressed as ambition. Radical acceptance breaks this cycle, not by removing the desire to grow, but by removing the hatred of what is. It says, yes, I want to grow, but I can love myself here too. It allows space for both honesty and compassion. You acknowledge the parts that hurt without pushing them away. You meet the parts that still need healing without making them wrong. This shift changes everything. You stop using healing as a punishment. You stop trying to become someone else and instead become more yourself. Growth stops being a desperate escape and becomes a gentle unfolding. You realize you don't need to be flawless to be whole. This is what Buddhism points to when it speaks of non-striving. It doesn't mean apathy. It means that your energy is no longer rooted in rejection. It means your practice becomes an offering, not a project, a path, not a performance. You begin to meditate, not to become better, but because you care. You rest, not because you earned it, but because you deserve it. You begin to trust that your inherent nature is not broken. It is just clouded, like a clear sky, hidden by passing weather. This doesn't mean you ignore pain or pretend you're fine. It means you stop believing that pain is a sign of failure. You stop interpreting discomfort as proof that you're not there yet. You see that being human includes imperfection. It includes doubt, fear, confusion, and none of those make you wrong. The mind will still try to argue. It will say, but if I accept myself now, I'll stop improving. This is not true. In fact, the opposite happens. When you're not stuck in self-rejection, energy is freed. You're no longer wasting strength on shame. Your nervous system softens, and from that calm state, you actually make wiser choices. You're not driven by panic. You're guided by clarity. Acceptance doesn't end growth. It deepens it. This is how real change happens. Not by punishing yourself into a better version, but by allowing your healing to come from care, not pressure. Acceptance creates space, and in that space, things shift on their own, gently, naturally, without force. This is also where compassion becomes essential. Self-compassion is often misunderstood. Some people think it's weakness. Others think it's just comfort. But in practice, compassion is strength. It's the steady presence that doesn't flinch in the face of your own pain. It's the hand on your heart when your thoughts turn cruel. It's the voice that says, I see your effort, I see your hurt, and I'm not abandoning you. You begin to see that you don't need to deserve kindness. You need to receive it, especially from yourself. You offer that kindness not because you've reached some imagined finish line, but because you're human. When the habit of fixing arises, you notice it. You don't scold it. you meet it with awareness. Ah, here is that voice again, the one that thinks I need to be more. And instead of obeying it, you breathe, you stay, you hold your ground, you say, I'm already enough, even here. That's radical. This practice also invites deeper honesty. You begin to see where fixing has been used to avoid feeling. Sometimes self-improvement is a distraction. It gives us something to do instead of something to feel. But acceptance asks us to stay, to sit with what is, to welcome the fear, the grief, the loneliness, not because we enjoy them, but because they're real, and because we no longer need to run. This is how peace grows, not by building layers of protection, but by removing the armor we no longer need. When you stop rejecting what's inside you, you become softer. And in that softness, you become stronger, less reactive, less afraid. You also stop comparing your healing to someone else's. You see that each path is different. Each pace is valid. There is no behind. There is only here. The need to fix often arises from comparison, but acceptance cuts through that noise. It reminds you that your journey doesn't need to look like anyone else's. You are not late. You are not missing out. You are unfolding as you are meant to. And as that unfolds, you start to feel safer in your own presence. You begin to spend less energy performing for others or proving your worth. You stop building identities around healing. You stop clinging to the role of the wounded one or the one who overcame. You just are, and that is enough. There is nothing wrong with wanting to grow, wanting to heal, wanting to feel better. But when those desires come from fear, they trap us. When they come from acceptance, they free us. Letting go of the self-fixer doesn't mean you stop evolving. It means your evolution is no longer rooted in shame. It becomes rooted in love, in care, in the deep understanding that you are not broken. You are human, you are learning, and that is not a flaw, it is your path. So the next time you catch yourself spiraling into another project to fix your life, pause. Ask yourself, what if I'm okay right now? Not perfect, not finished, but okay. What if I could rest here without rushing towards something else? And if that feels hard, let it be hard. Acceptance doesn't demand ease, it only asks for honesty. You meet the moment as it is. You meet yourself as you are. No more forcing, no more fixing, no more chasing some better version of you like happiness is locked behind the next upgrade. You are here, you are whole, and that is more than enough. So breathe, stay with yourself, and let the healing come, not as a task, but as a return. A return to the truth that was always waiting beneath all the striving. You are already worthy, even now, especially now. And so you begin to see the difference, that healing isn't about adding more or becoming someone else. It's about the quiet strength of being with what is. You stop fixing, you start listening. You give yourself permission to rest in the truth of your own presence. But there's another weight still held in many hearts, one heavier than self-doubt and often more hidden. It's the weight of what others have done, the words that cut, the betrayals that stayed, the deep sting of harm left unanswered. You say you've let it go, you've moved on, but some part of it still lives in the body, still echoes in thought, still clouds the heart when silence falls. What do you do with pain that wasn't yours to carry, but became yours to hold? This is where forgiveness enters, not as a favor, not as a moral checkbox, but as a path to your own freedom. Forgiveness, in its truest form, has nothing to do with the other person. It isn't about making what happened okay. It's not about forgetting. It's not even about reconciliation. In Buddhist understanding, forgiveness is the deliberate act of releasing yourself from the bondage of resentment. It's a spiritual cleansing, not for them, but for you. When harm is done, it doesn't end with the event itself. The mind replays it, the body stores it, the heart builds walls around it. This is the karmic residue that lingers, not because of the action, but because of the energy we continue to feed it with. Anger, judgment, bitterness, all of it becomes a loop. Karma, in Buddhist psychology, isn't punishment. It's momentum. It's the continuation of causes and conditions. The pain that was caused becomes a seed. If we hold on to it tightly, water it with thought, and revisit it often, it grows into a life of its own. Our freedom becomes tied to the past. And yet, it's not the original pain that binds us. It's the unwillingness to let go of the chain it created. Forgiveness breaks that chain, not because what happened is excused, but because the one who was harmed refuses to carry it any longer. This act isn't quick. It's not about forcing a feeling of peace before its time. Forgiveness in Buddhism begins with clarity. First, we acknowledge what was done, not deny it, not soften it. We see it for what it was, and we name the pain it caused, not to dwell, but to understand the weight we've been holding. This part matters, because sometimes what we're calling forgiveness is actually suppression. We skip over the pain to look strong. We tell ourselves it's in the past, but deep down, we're still holding the wound like a closed fist. True forgiveness doesn't bypass pain. It meets it head-on. Once the wound is seen, we start the process of release. That process starts with recognizing that the past cannot be undone, that what happened has already shaped part of our story, and continuing to carry resentment does not protect us from the harm. It prolongs it. The hurt happened once. Our resentment makes it happen again and again. Letting go of resentment is a kind of grieving. We grieve the wish that it had been different. We grieve the hope that they might make it right. And in that grieving, a deeper understanding arises. They may never say sorry. They may never understand the damage they caused. And even if they do, it won't erase what's already been felt. So, we choose not to forget, but to free ourselves. We stop waiting for the apology that may never come. We stop defining ourselves by what was done. And instead, we start writing a different ending to the story. One where we are not bound to the actions of others. Buddhist teachings emphasize that each being is the owner of their karma. Their choices belong to them. Their actions will bear consequences, whether we see it or not. We don't have to carry their karma for them. And when we cling to resentment, that's what we do. We take on someone else's energy as our own. Forgiveness returns us to ourselves. It allows us to step out of the karmic entanglement and say, this ends here. Not out of weakness, but out of strength. Out of the deep knowing that your peace is worth more than your pain. There's also something else forgiveness makes possible. Understanding. Not of the act, but of the suffering behind it. Buddhism teaches that all harmful action arises from ignorance, confusion, and inner turmoil. People cause harm when they are disconnected from their own truth, from their own heart. This doesn't justify what they did, but it makes space for a broader view. When we see that even those who hurt us are suffering, something softens, not because they deserve compassion, but because we deserve peace, and holding on to hate burns us from the inside. You begin to see that everyone is acting from their own pain, their own conditioning, their own karmic patterns. Some people have never been taught how to love. Others don't know how to regulate their own fear. That doesn't excuse abuse, but it allows you to step back from the cycle and say, I will not pass this pain forward. Forgiveness in this way becomes generational healing. You stop carrying the energy of vengeance. You stop teaching your nervous system that protection must always come through anger, and you begin to rest, not in perfection, but in release. Release takes time. Some wounds are deep, and sometimes we have to forgive the same person 100 times, not because they keep hurting us, but because the memory returns. And every time it does, we get another chance to practice, another chance to say, yes, this hurt, but it does not define me. And this includes forgiving yourself. One of the most difficult forms of forgiveness. Sometimes the resentment is not aimed outward. It's directed inward, at our younger self, our past choices, our moments of weakness. We think, I should have known better. Why did I allow that? How could I have been so blind? But the one who made those choices was not who you are now. They were learning. They were trying. They were doing the best they could with the awareness they had. Forgiveness doesn't mean you approve of what happened. It means you stop attacking yourself for not being wiser sooner. The Buddha taught that hatred never ends through hatred. It ends through love. That includes self-hatred. That includes the little voice inside that says, you're too broken to be whole again. That voice is lying. You are not too far gone. You are not beyond healing. You are not your worst moment. And every time you soften toward yourself, you break a piece of that lie. Forgiveness is love in action. It's love that says, I choose peace, even if they never change. It's love that says, I choose to put this burden down, even if justice never comes in the way I hoped. And in that choice, the heart becomes lighter, not because everything is fixed, but because you are no longer tangled in what cannot be changed. Buddhist practice often includes loving kindness meditation as a tool for forgiveness. You start with yourself, then someone you love, then someone neutral, then someone difficult, and eventually all beings. You send them wishes of peace, not because they deserve it, but because hatred is heavy and you're tired of carrying it. This doesn't mean you allow harm to continue. Forgiveness and boundaries can exist together. You can forgive and still walk away. You can forgive and still say no. You can forgive and never speak to them again. The difference is in your heart, not closing, not clenching, not burning with the fire of unresolved rage. When you forgive, you remember that you have a life to live, a mind to calm, a heart to open, and pain does not have the right to claim every corner of it. You start to dream again, to feel safe in your own presence, to experience joy that isn't shadowed by bitterness. You start to remember who you were before the harm, Or maybe you discover who you are now, someone stronger, deeper, more compassionate than you ever imagined. That is the power of forgiveness. It's not forgetting, it's remembering your own freedom. So, if there is still a name that stirs anger in your chest, a memory that keeps circling, don't rush, just breathe. Acknowledge the hurt, but also remember your power. You do not have to stay caught in the karma of pain. You can step out, you can heal, you can walk forward, not as a victim, not as a warrior, but as a soul who chose peace over poison. And that choice? That is where real strength lives. You've seen now how forgiveness is not a reward for others. It's a doorway out of your own suffering. You've felt what it's like to unclench the heart, to let go of what no longer belongs to you. And yet, for many, something still lingers beneath the letting go. A dull ache, a silent echo that returns in quiet moments. Even when the story fades, the pain sometimes remains. Why does it stay, even after all the healing work? What gives pain its grip, its shape, its ability to color every part of your experience? To answer this, we need to look deeper, not just at what pain feels like, but what it is. Not through emotion, but through wisdom. This is where the teachings of Madhyamaka, Buddhist philosophy's middle way, offer a powerful shift, not a technique, but a way of seeing. One that dissolves the very foundation of suffering. The mind holds pain as if it's solid, real, fixed. We experience heartbreak, rejection, loneliness, shame, and the feeling comes with a story, a sensation, and a belief. This is happening to me. I am this pain. That belief is what gives the pain weight, identity, continuity. And from that, suffering grows. But Madhyamaka shows us something radical, that pain, like all phenomena, is empty. Empty not in the sense that it doesn't exist, but in the sense that it lacks a fixed, independent self. It's not solid. It's not permanent. It doesn't exist in the way we think it does. At first, this sounds strange. Pain feels so real, so sharp, but that sharpness is exactly what Madhyamaka helps us explore. It asks, what is pain exactly? Is it the sensation in your chest, the thoughts in your head, the story you tell about what happened, the reaction in your body, the belief that it will never go away? When you look closely, pain is not one thing. It's a collection of changing parts. Thoughts arise, pass, sensations shift, move, memories come and go. There's no single core to grasp. And yet, we suffer as if there is. When the mind identifies with pain, it turns into a self. It becomes my pain. It gets woven into the identity. I am broken. I am wounded. I am not enough. These are not just thoughts. They become lenses. And those lenses filter every moment. But if you remove the label, if you take a closer look, what do you really find? Only movement, only energy, only change. What looked like a solid wall is actually mist. This insight doesn't deny the experience of pain. It doesn't ask you to pretend it's not real. It simply reveals that pain doesn't have the solidity the mind gives it. And that recognition is liberating. Because when you stop clinging to pain as yours, it loosens its hold. The ego wants to make everything personal. This happened to me. This is my wound. But pain is not personal. It's part of the human condition. It arises under certain causes and conditions. When those conditions shift, the pain shifts. It's not a punishment, not a reflection of your worth, not a fixed identity. When you truly see that, you begin to breathe again. Madhyamaka teachings point out that all things arise dependently. Nothing exists on its own, not even emotional suffering. That means pain can't sustain itself without your participation. It needs attention. It needs belief. It needs identification. When you withdraw those, pain loses its fuel. This isn't done through suppression. It's done through deep inquiry. You ask, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Where is this pain located? What gives it meaning? If I stop thinking about it, does it stay the same? If I view it without my story, does it still feel personal? These questions don't give quick answers, but they open space. And in that space, something shifts. Most people think healing means removing pain. But from this view, healing is understanding pain, seeing its empty nature, not empty like a void, but empty like a wave, real in experience, but lacking fixed form. The wave arises, peaks, and dissolves. It was never a thing. It was always a process. When you stop trying to hold on to pain or push it away, you meet it in real time. You watch it rise. You see it pass. You begin to trust that it doesn't define you. That insight is not just intellectual, it's felt. You start to experience yourself less as the one having pain and more as the awareness noticing pain. This shift is subtle but powerful. You stop being consumed by what arises. The emotion can still come, but you don't drown in it. You don't wrap your identity around it. You let it move through. This also applies to emotional wounds from the past. So often, we think of past pain as part of who we are. Childhood trauma, heartbreak, loss. They become chapters in the story of me. But from this view, the past is not fixed. The memory is real, but its emotional charge changes when you stop clinging to it as proof of your identity. You are not the same person who was hurt. The self is not a permanent thing. It is a flow of causes and conditions. What you feel now is a response, not a definition. And when you stop anchoring in the wound, you can meet the world freshly without dragging old pain into every new moment. This isn't detachment, it's clarity. You don't stop caring. You don't deny your history. You simply stop confusing it with who you are. Pain happened. You felt it. But it is not your essence. It doesn't need to become your name. This is also why comparison creates so much suffering. You measure your wounds against others. You decide that your pain is heavier or less valid. But all pain, no matter its shape, shares the same nature. It is dependently arisen. It is impermanent. It is empty of a solid core. Seeing that brings compassion, not just for yourself, but for others. Their pain is not less real. It's also not ultimate. This understanding doesn't make you cold. It softens the ego. It makes room for tenderness without being overwhelmed. You can hold space for pain, yours or someone else's, without becoming it. One of the traps in emotional healing is the idea that deeper pain equals deeper truth. That if you feel something intensely, it must be meaningful. But intensity is not proof, it's just energy. Pain can feel overwhelming and still be based on a distorted view. Just because a thought causes emotion doesn't mean the thought is true. And just because a feeling lingers doesn't mean it holds meaning. Madhyamaka invites you to question not just thoughts, but the very framework that gives rise to suffering. It doesn't say change your thoughts. It says, see that all thoughts, all feelings, all stories are empty of fixed identity. When you see this, you stop getting trapped, and you start to live more freely. That freedom is not a denial of reality. It is a deeper intimacy with it. You start to notice the moment before the story, the space between emotion and reaction. That space is where healing lives. In that space, you don't need to fight the pain or fix the pain. You simply let it come, and you let it go. Because you no longer believe that pain is the whole truth. You know it is a visitor, and like all visitors, it will leave. This changes how you respond to the body too. Physical pain often triggers emotional resistance. You feel it and immediately grasp. Why is this happening? Will it ever end? What does it mean? But pain is just sensation. When stripped of story, it changes. It may still hurt, but it doesn't scare you. It doesn't define you. It becomes part of the landscape, not the whole terrain. This also helps with the fear of future suffering. The mind projects ahead. It anticipates loss, failure, heartbreak, and it suffers early, trying to control what hasn't yet happened. But what you're afraid of is not the event. It's the story, and the story is empty. Without belief, it collapses. You begin to understand that peace isn't found in the absence of pain. It's found in the absence of grasping at pain as real, permanent, or personal. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop needing everything to be fixed before you feel okay. You realize, I can feel this and still be free. I can experience this and still know who I am beneath it. I can meet this moment, even in pain, and still not lose myself to it. That's the power of seeing through, not looking away, but looking clearly. Pain no longer needs to be erased. It only needs to be seen, fully, directly, with wisdom. And in that seeing, it dissolves, not because you made it go, but because you stopped holding it up. When the story fades, when the self in the center softens, what remains is space, stillness, presence. From there, life opens up, not because the pain is gone, but because it no longer controls you. And in that opening, healing happens, quietly, naturally, not from effort, but from clarity. The clarity that knows pain arises, pain passes, and in the deepest sense, there was never a solid me for it to belong to. There is only this moment, this awareness, this breath, and here there is peace. When pain no longer holds the same weight, when it is seen clearly and allowed to move without resistance, something deeper begins to surface, an ancient discomfort beneath all others. It is not about what we feel, it is about what we fear we will lose. This fear does not always speak loudly, but it shapes the way we live. It whispers in the background when loved ones fall sick. It rises when something familiar changes. It appears in the quiet hours of the night when everything goes still. It is the fear of impermanence. We try to silence it by clinging. We hold on to people, moments, identities, and routines. We pretend that change can be delayed, if we plan enough or hope enough. But change continues. Time does not pause. The truth is, much of our suffering does not come from what is happening. It comes from our resistance to endings. Buddhist teachings do not treat impermanence as a problem. They see it as the essential nature of reality. What comes will go. What rises will fall. This is not something to fear. It is something to understand. Because in understanding it, we stop wasting energy on denial. We begin to live more honestly. The Buddha offered a clear path into this understanding through what is known as the 5 remembrances. These are not ideas to believe in. They are truths to reflect on. Simple, clear truths that touch every life, no matter where we come from, how much we have, or what we believe. They are not morbid. They are not meant to bring despair. They are meant to wake us up, to free us from illusion. The first remembrance is, I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot avoid aging. This statement does not say aging is a failure. It does not say aging is wrong. It says only that aging is natural. We are taught to fight age, to cover it, to fear it. But aging is not something that happens to us. It is something that happens with us. Every day, the body shifts, skin changes, energy moves differently. But instead of seeing this as decline, we can see it as the movement of life. When we remember that aging is certain, we stop taking time for granted. We begin to soften toward the body instead of demanding it always stay young. We start to care for it with kindness instead of punishment. We stop expecting permanence from something that was never built to last forever. The second remembrance is, I am of the nature to become ill. I cannot avoid illness. Health is often mistaken for control. We think if we eat right, move enough, think positively, we can outrun all sickness. And while care is important, it does not cancel out nature. Illness may come, sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes slowly, but it is not a punishment. It is a condition of being alive in a human body. This doesn't mean we give up on health. It means we hold it with humility. We stop blaming ourselves or others when the body struggles. We let go of the belief that we are failing when we are simply meeting life's conditions. And when illness comes, we meet it not with panic, but with presence. We ask not only how to cure it, but how to care through it, how to learn from it, how to remain whole even when the body is not. The third remembrance is, I am of the nature to die. I cannot avoid death. This is the most confronting truth. Not because we don't know it, but because we try so hard to forget it. Yet death is not far away. It is not something that waits only at the end. It is present in every day, in every ending, every change, every breath that passes. To reflect on death is not to live in fear, but to live with clarity. Avoiding death does not protect us from it. It only makes us live in anxiety. When we face it directly, something strange happens. We become freer. We stop postponing life. We stop waiting for the perfect moment. We speak the truth more often. We forgive more quickly. We release what no longer matters, because we see what always has. Our time here is brief. This doesn't mean we rush through life. It means we meet each moment fully. We stop assuming we have time. We don't know how long we or those we love will be here. That truth can hurt, but it also invites deep gratitude. We see each interaction as precious. We stop wasting connection on petty arguments. We begin to cherish what is, not what could have been. The fourth remembrance is, all that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. This truth breaks through the most painful illusion, that if we love enough, we can keep people forever. But no one stays unchanged. No relationship remains fixed. And eventually, there is separation, through distance, through time, through death. This is not cruel. It is the nature of things. But when we forget this, we grasp. We become controlling. We cling to roles and relationships as if they could be preserved exactly as they are. We suffer when people grow or leave or die, not just because of the loss, but because we thought they would always stay. When we remember the truth of change, we start to love more openly. We stop trying to hold people in place. We let them change. We let ourselves change. And we value the time we do have, not as something guaranteed, but as something rare. We stop waiting to say what matters. We begin to live in a way that is honest, real, and awake. The fifth remembrance is, my actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. They are the ground upon which I stand. This is not a warning, it is a reminder of empowerment. Everything else can be lost. Health, youth, relationships, possessions. But how we show up, how we speak, how we treat others, this leaves a trace. Our actions shape our path, not because of judgment, but because of causality. This remembrance grounds us in responsibility. It asks us to consider the energy we leave behind, not just in words, but in how we make people feel, in how we respond when things are difficult, in what kind of presence we bring into the world. When we know our actions matter, we stop living on autopilot. We begin to live with integrity. We stop blaming others for our emotions. We take responsibility for our choices. We forgive ourselves when needed, but we also remain accountable, not to please anyone, but because it's the only ground that doesn't shift. Taken together, these remembrances do something powerful. They remove illusion. They cut through distraction. They wake us up, not to fear, but to truth. Most of the fear people carry is rooted in resistance to these 5 truths. We fear loss, we fear illness, we fear endings, but these are not enemies. They are reminders. They point us back to what matters most. When we reflect on these teachings, we become less reactive. We stop needing everything to be perfect. We stop expecting life to go according to our plans. And instead, we meet it as it is, with openness, with clarity, with compassion. This clarity softens fear, because fear grows in confusion, in the belief that what is temporary can be made permanent. But nothing needs to last forever to be meaningful. Impermanence does not make life empty, it makes it precious. You don't need to meditate for years to feel this. You can reflect now, gently, honestly, and you'll feel it, the shift from clinging to gratitude, from fear to freedom. You'll see that what is most alive in you doesn't come from control. It comes from presence. Presence that knows every breath is a gift. Every goodbye is sacred. Every act of love leaves something behind. The 5 remembrances are not meant to be recited and forgotten. They are meant to be lived, held close, returned to in times of confusion. They are the compass when the map disappears. And when you carry these truths, you move differently in the world. You forgive more easily. You listen more deeply. You live with less regret, because you know what really matters. Not what you own, not what people think, not even how long something lasts, but how deeply you loved, how honestly you lived, and how fully you met this moment, knowing it would never come again. This is the heart of peace. Not a peace found through escape, but a peace found in truth. A peace that doesn't depend on things staying the same. A peace that holds change gently and still says, yes, yes to the beauty. Yes to the loss. Yes to the mystery of being here at all. You begin to carry life with a different kind of reverence once you accept that everything you love will change. There's less rush, less noise. A soft awareness opens inside you. But for some, even as they welcome impermanence, a deeper tension remains. A heaviness that seems older than this lifetime. Something unspoken yet deeply familiar. It is a sadness or anger that feels inherited. A pattern that repeats without clear origin. A grief that did not begin with you, but now lives inside you. This is the territory of karmic imprints, the traces left by past actions, thoughts, and emotions. Not just your own, but those passed down across time, generations, and ancestral lines. It's the quiet undercurrent in many families, the shame that's never named, the silence around pain, the unprocessed trauma that moves from one life to another, not through punishment, but through momentum. Buddhist psychology teaches that karma is not fate. It is not a fixed sentence. It is not about deserving suffering. Karma means action, and every action leaves a trace. A mental, emotional, energetic impression. These imprints shape how we see the world, how we react, and what we unconsciously repeat. Some karma is personal, patterns you create through your own choices, but some is collective, some is inherited. When your parents carry unhealed wounds, those energies affect how they relate to you. Even if you don't adopt their beliefs, you may absorb their emotional tone. If a lineage has carried fear, shame, control or grief for decades or centuries, that current moves through you, often without your awareness. This is why healing often feels harder than expected. You think you're working with your own wounds, but you're also holding the energy of others. You're breaking cycles you didn't start. That work is sacred. It's not only self-liberation, it's a form of service. It's a return to clarity for those who came before and those who will come after. To begin this work, awareness must come first. You learn to watch not just what triggers you, but how it feels in the body. You ask whether the intensity of your emotion belongs entirely to you. When you feel abandoned, is it yours, or is it part of a generational fear of being left behind? When you fear failure, is it your fear, or the echo of an ancestor who was punished for trying? These questions are not to create distance. They are to loosen identification, to see that not all pain means something is wrong with you. Some pain is inherited weight, waiting for someone brave enough to set it down. The body holds memory, not just muscle memory or cognitive memory, but emotional memory passed through generations. This is not metaphor. Modern studies in epigenetics show that trauma can leave markers on DNA that affect how future generations respond to stress. Buddhist teachings understood this long before science caught up. They spoke of tendencies passed on not just through bloodlines, but through karmic associations, habits of heart and mind that move across time. So when you practice mindfulness, you're not just calming your own mind, you are gently interrupting old loops. When you respond with compassion instead of rage, you are breaking a thread. When you offer forgiveness where there has only been silence, you open space for something new to grow. Healing karmic patterns requires more than understanding. It requires commitment to not repeat. And this begins with attention. You begin to trace your reactions back to their roots. When you feel abandoned, do you chase people? When you feel criticized, do you shut down or fight back? When you feel unseen, do you try harder, overperform, overgive? These habits may feel automatic, but they are not permanent. They are learned strategies. Once seen, they can be softened. Each time you choose a new way, you weaken the karmic imprint. You don't need to fix the entire lineage. You only need to meet this moment differently. That choice, repeated over time, is what frees you. This work can also awaken grief, because as you become more aware, you start to see how much your family suffered. You begin to feel compassion for their silence, their harshness, their fear. You see that they were repeating what they had learned. Their actions were not excused, but they are understood. This understanding helps dissolve resentment, not because you pretend everything was fine, but because you stop needing them to be different in order to heal. In this way, healing generational karma does not require confrontation. It requires clarity. You stop waiting for someone else to change. You begin to stand in your own truth, your own energy, your own path. Sometimes you'll feel guilt for breaking family rules. You might be the first to set boundaries, the first to speak openly, the first to seek help. That courage may bring resistance, but it is also the doorway to change. You are not betraying your family by choosing a different path. You are honoring them by not passing on what caused harm. Ritual can also support this process. In Buddhism, there are practices that help cleanse karmic energy: chanting, offering, acts of merit dedicated to those who have passed. These are not symbolic gestures. They are ways of shifting the field of consciousness. You don't need complex ceremonies. Even a silent prayer, a candle lit with intention, a letter never sent. These acts help release what words alone cannot. But the most powerful practice is presence. Simply staying present with your experience, without running, fixing, or judging, disrupts the transmission of unconscious patterns. Each moment you meet your pain without passing it on, you become the turning point in your lineage. You may also notice that some karmic patterns try to disguise themselves as personality traits. You think you're just someone who worries, or someone who never feels safe, or someone who always needs to prove something. But beneath those labels are stories inherited through generations, stories that say love must be earned, or that silence keeps you safe, or that your worth depends on what others think. As you become more conscious of these stories, you create space. Space to choose a different belief. Space to speak what was never spoken. Space to soften around what once seemed hardwired. And over time, that space becomes a new field. A field where tenderness is not weakness, where boundaries are not rejection, where truth is not dangerous. This field doesn't erase the past, but it no longer lives by its rules. In Buddhist thought, karma also ripens across time. Not everything that arises now began recently, and not every seed you plant today will bloom right away. This teaches patience. You may not feel different overnight, but the work you're doing ripples forward. Healing may not be instant, but it is inevitable when done with intention and consistency. Compassion is essential here, not only toward your family, but toward yourself. You may stumble. You may fall into old patterns. You may feel discouraged. This does not undo your progress. Each return to awareness is a victory. Each moment of self-honesty is a cleansing. Each time you hold your own heart with kindness, you're building a different future. This process also reveals your strength, not the kind that pushes through, but the kind that transforms. The quiet courage to stop running, to stop numbing, to sit with pain that is not yours and choose not to continue it. That is powerful. This kind of healing is not linear. It spirals, it deepens. Some patterns may return in new forms. That's not failure, it's refinement. Each layer you meet brings you closer to clarity, closer to freedom, closer to the still point beneath all the stories. And from that still point, something else arises, a deeper compassion for the world. When you understand how pain is passed down, you see that everyone is carrying something invisible. You judge less. You listen more. You recognize that behind most behaviors is a wound, and behind that wound, a history. That insight doesn't make you passive. It makes you wise. You stop taking things so personally. You understand that healing is not just for the self. It's for the field we all share. Every kind act, every conscious breath, every honest word shifts the field. It matters. So as you continue on this path, remember that you are not walking alone. You walk with those who came before. You walk for those who come after. Your healing echoes. Your courage matters. This is the essence of karmic awareness, not a burden, but a gift. A chance to meet what has been carried too long and finally, gently, set it down. Not in anger, not in shame, but in truth, in clarity, in compassion. And from there, the future changes, not through force, not through erasing the past, but through presence, through awareness, through love. You've begun to sense it now, that freedom doesn't always come from doing more, becoming someone else, or even understanding everything perfectly. Sometimes it comes from not continuing what never belonged to you. Sometimes it comes from stepping out of old stories and letting the heart rest where it is. But even with that awareness, something still pulls at the edges. A quiet, constant pressure. A background noise that says you're running out of time. It shows up as urgency, as guilt, as regret. It's in the voice that tells you you should be further along, that you missed your chance, that you're too late to begin. It lives in thoughts like, I wasted too many years. I should have known better, or I don't have enough time to get it right. This is the wound of not enough progress, not enough success, not enough years ahead. And beneath it all, not enough presence. This wound isn't personal. It's woven into modern life. People are praised for being busy, for rushing, for constantly moving. Productivity is worshipped. Slowness is treated like failure. Rest is misunderstood as laziness, and in all this pressure to hurry, we forget how to be where we are. We forget that time is not a threat, it's a field we live in. Mindfulness reveals this truth. It shows us that the experience of time is not fixed. It stretches and contracts depending on our attention. 1 hour of joy can feel like a moment. 1 minute of suffering can feel like forever. Time, as we know it, is not just the ticking of a clock. It's the way we relate to change. The Buddhist path doesn't deny time. It works with it skillfully. It points us to presence, not as a vague idea, but as a direct experience of reality. When we are truly present, the future and past are no longer heavy. They exist, but they don't dominate. Regret and anticipation soften. What's left is clarity, breath, awareness, enoughness. The belief that we're behind in life is one of the most painful mental patterns. It creates anxiety that has no clear source. You could be safe, loved, even at peace, and still feel like you're losing a race you don't remember entering. This mental tension comes from measuring yourself against invisible deadlines. Society teaches that you must reach milestones by certain ages, but when you investigate these beliefs, you find they are arbitrary. No age guarantees wisdom. No deadline defines your worth. Letting go of time doesn't mean giving up on plans. It means releasing the belief that your value is measured by how quickly you get somewhere. It means you stop tying your self-worth to what you achieve in a year or a decade. You start asking better questions, not "Am I on schedule?" but "Am I present for this moment?" This shift also dissolves regret. Regret is not just sadness about the past. It's the belief that things could have been different if only you had known more. But the truth is, you were always doing what you could with the awareness you had. The past cannot be changed, but your relationship to it can be healed. Mindfulness brings you back to now. It shows you that every breath is a doorway. Every moment is a chance to begin again. Even if you've wasted time, even if you've hurt others, even if you've delayed healing, you can return now. Life is not asking for your perfection, it's asking for your attention. The wound of not enough also shows up in the future. The mind races to what's next. It fears losing time. It chases achievement to make up for past delays. But the future is just another thought. It hasn't arrived. And when you live too much in anticipation, you miss what is already here. There is no peace in the future. There is only the idea of peace. The real thing lives in this breath, this step, this word. You begin to understand that the present moment is not a means to an end. It is the end. Not because goals don't matter, but because life only happens here. This insight can be uncomfortable. It strips away the comfort of someday. It asks you to stop postponing presence, to stop waiting for everything to be figured out. But what it offers in return is stability, not the kind built from control, but the kind born from truth. You begin to live more slowly, more deliberately. You listen fully. You speak with care. You taste your food. You notice your breath. And in that noticing, you remember that time is not against you. It's unfolding with you. This doesn't mean you won't make mistakes, but you'll stop defining yourself by them. You'll stop telling stories that say you're too late, too old, too behind. Instead, you'll meet yourself where you are, not with urgency, but with understanding. You may still have ambitions, you may still have goals, but they will be rooted in joy, not fear. You'll want to grow, not because you're not enough, but because it's your nature to expand. You'll set intentions, not timelines, and you'll trust that what is meant for you won't need to be chased. It will arrive when you're ready to meet it. There's also healing in realizing that slowing down is not wasting time. It's reclaiming it. When you pause, when you rest, when you do something for no reason other than love, you are not falling behind. You are touching something timeless. You are stepping out of the mind's pressure and into the heart's rhythm. And from this rhythm, you begin to see others differently too. You stop measuring people by their progress. You stop expecting them to be on your timeline. You meet them in the present where they are. This brings patience, compassion, real connection. You stop rushing conversations. You stop treating relationships like tasks. You begin to show up fully. Letting go of time also heals the body. Chronic stress often comes from feeling rushed. The nervous system tenses when the mind is always ahead. But when you return to the breath, the body softens. It no longer feels like it has to keep up. It begins to trust that it's safe to be here. This presence becomes your refuge, not because life is always easy, but because you no longer abandon yourself in hard moments. You stay, you feel, you breathe, and in doing so, you break the cycle of scarcity. The belief that there's never enough time, never enough progress, never enough presence. There is no final version of you waiting in the future. There is only who you are now, becoming more aware. That awareness is already whole, already enough. You don't need to chase it. You need to come back to it. When you fully let go of the belief that time defines you, you become more alive. Not in theory, but in practice. You laugh more. You notice the sky. You cry without rushing. You hold someone's hand and feel everything in that simple act. These are not small things. These are the moments that carry real weight. Not because they are dramatic, but because they are real. You begin to live less from memory and less for expectation. You stop trying to prove something. You stop looking at life as a list of deadlines and start seeing it as a field of experience. Always changing. Always now. This shift is not about perfection. Some days you'll forget. The mind will rush. The voice will return. That's okay. You don't need to fight it. Just notice, breathe, return. Every return is healing. Every return weakens the belief that you're late, because you're not. You've never been. The idea of being behind was never true. It was just a voice you inherited, a collective story that said you had to move faster, do more, reach higher. But you can drop that now. You can choose presence instead of pressure, awareness instead of speed. And in doing so, you don't lose time. You finally begin to live in it. Once the grip of time loosens, once the noise of not being enough begins to settle, what remains is something quieter, but even more unfamiliar. Space. A wide, open stillness that doesn't demand anything. And for many, that's the most difficult part. Not the effort of chasing, but the surrender of stopping. It feels foreign to be still without needing to perform, to speak without needing to explain, or more precisely, to not speak at all. There is a kind of silence that feels empty, the silence that comes from isolation or avoidance. But there's another kind, a silence that heals, a silence that holds, a silence that speaks without words. In Buddhism, this is known as noble silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness. It's a conscious choice to withdraw from the noise, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Most of our mental exhaustion comes not from what's happening, but from the stories we tell about what's happening. We repeat thoughts aloud or to ourselves. We narrate every situation. We explain ourselves endlessly. We defend, argue, justify, plan, replay, and all of it fuels the chaos. Words are not neutral. They carry energy. They shape perception. They reinforce identity. They can be medicine, but they can also be noise. When we speak without awareness, we lose connection to what's real. We start reacting to our interpretations instead of responding to the moment. Noble silence is not just a technique. It's a reset. It returns the mind to simplicity. It stops the momentum of unnecessary thought. And in that pause, a deeper layer of truth begins to surface. Not truth as opinion or philosophy, but the clarity that comes when the inner dialogue quiets and you actually hear what's underneath. This silence is not empty, it's alive. It holds space for things to arise and dissolve. It teaches patience, not the kind that tolerates discomfort, but the kind that listens without rushing. When you don't feel the need to fill every space with words, you begin to notice what you were trying to avoid. Often, we speak to cover discomfort. Silence makes us feel exposed. We talk to maintain control, to soften awkwardness, to fill the gap between ourselves and others. But noble silence invites us to face that discomfort directly. And in doing so, we begin to find peace, not in solving things, but in allowing them to be. Mental clarity grows when you speak less. Not because talking is wrong, but because restraint reveals what's essential. When you stop trying to comment on every thought or share every reaction, the mind begins to settle. Thoughts lose their grip. The narrative slows down. You stop believing every passing idea needs to become a conversation. This doesn't mean suppressing your voice. Noble silence is not repression. It's alignment. You learn to speak when your words come from wisdom, not restlessness. When they build connection, not clutter. When they arise from presence, not habit. In daily life, this can look like pausing before you respond, waiting before offering advice, letting a conversation breathe. It means noticing your intention before speaking. Are you adding clarity or just adding noise? Are you seeking connection or trying to avoid discomfort? Silence also helps dissolve the ego's grip. So much of our identity is maintained through speech. We say things to assert who we are, what we believe, where we stand. But when you sit in silence, none of that is necessary. You stop performing. You stop polishing your image. And in that space, something softer emerges. You begin to experience yourself without needing to define yourself. You stop needing to prove your intelligence, your goodness, your strength. You stop reacting to defend a self-image. And that simplicity is freedom. Noble silence is especially healing during conflict. When emotions are high, words often make things worse. We speak from heat, not clarity. Silence creates a pause. It protects space. It gives the nervous system time to settle. It gives both sides room to see what's actually being felt, beyond the argument, beyond the roles, beyond the triggers. When practiced regularly, silence becomes a refuge. Not a place to hide, but a space to come home. You stop looking outside for peace and begin to trust your own stillness. You start to realize that wisdom often speaks in the quiet. Insight arises not when you're pushing for answers, but when you're soft enough to receive them. Many great teachers spoke very little, not because they had nothing to say, but because they understood the value of words. They knew that silence often teaches more than instruction. It points to what words cannot reach. This can be practiced in many ways. A few hours of intentional silence each day. A full day of not speaking, even just once a week. Sitting in nature without a phone, without a book, without the urge to explain anything, simply being. Watching the thoughts rise and fall without responding to them, letting the mind unwind. This kind of silence is not always comfortable at first. You might feel restless. The mind may try to fill the space with plans, memories, self-judgment. But if you stay, if you keep coming back to the breath, the sensations, the presence, the noise begins to lose its urgency. And beneath it, you'll find something else. Stillness that doesn't depend on perfect circumstances. A peace that doesn't come from everything going your way. A kind of knowing that can't be put into words, but you'll feel it. The more time you spend in noble silence, the more clearly you see your patterns. You become aware of what triggers you to speak, what stories feel too uncomfortable to sit with, what emotions you try to avoid by reaching for conversation. This is not about judgment. It's about seeing clearly. Because what you see clearly, you no longer fear. This clarity affects everything. Relationships become deeper. You listen more. You hear not just the words, but the feelings beneath them. You stop interrupting. You stop preparing your next sentence while the other person is talking. You begin to hold space. Real space. The kind that makes people feel seen. Even your relationship with yourself begins to change. You stop narrating your every move. You stop needing to explain your emotions. You start resting in awareness rather than analyzing everything. That shift alone is a deep healing. Because so much suffering comes not from what we experience, but from how much we try to manage it with thought. Letting yourself be silent means letting go of control. And in that release, you come closer to peace than any clever sentence could ever bring. This does not mean we should never speak. Words can be healing. They can offer insight, comfort, connection. But they should come from stillness, not from habit. When words arise from silence, they carry a different weight. They are not reactive. They are responsive. They don't fill space. They open it. Noble silence also restores your energy. Every interaction takes energy, even pleasant ones. Constant talking, texting, explaining, it all drains the mind. When you choose silence, even for a short time, you give yourself space to recharge. Your thoughts slow, your breath deepens, your nervous system resets. In silence, there's no one to impress, no role to maintain, no image to uphold, just awareness, meeting awareness. And that meeting is healing. You begin to discover that silence is not the absence of connection. It is the foundation of it. You don't need to speak to be close to someone. You don't need to explain everything to be understood. Sometimes, sitting quietly with another being is more intimate than 1,000 words, because in that quiet, there is no effort, just presence. This practice is not about being better. It's about being real. You don't have to be a monk. You don't need to disappear into the forest. You just need to pause, breathe, listen. Let yourself not speak, and let that not speaking be enough. With time, silence becomes a teacher. It shows you what's been driving you. It reveals what really matters. And it returns you to the only place where peace has ever been possible. Not in the future, not in someone's approval, but here, in this breath, in this space, in this stillness. And as the silence deepens, so does your trust in life. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've finally made room for what can only be felt, not said. What can only be known, not explained. What has always been waiting, not behind more effort, but beneath all the noise. As the noise fades, and you've begun to taste the depth of stillness that noble silence offers, something else starts to rise quietly from underneath. It's not chaos this time, but a more refined tension. One that has roots not only in your thoughts, but in your sense of fairness, in what you believe should have happened and what never should have been allowed. It's the craving for justice, not the justice of laws or systems, but the personal craving, the ache to make things right, to see someone held accountable, to feel balance restored after pain, betrayal, or harm. This longing can be sharp and sometimes righteous. It appears when you've been hurt, when someone has taken more than they gave, when truth has been ignored, or when someone escapes consequences. And while it often starts as a desire for truth, it can quickly become something heavier. It becomes attachment. It becomes fire. In Buddhist teaching, craving lies at the center of suffering. It doesn't only apply to pleasure or desire. It also applies to emotional cravings. The craving for closure, the craving for revenge, the craving for fairness. We want justice to come, and when it doesn't arrive, we feel powerless. We replay events, build arguments in our head, imagine outcomes that never come. And all of this adds suffering to pain that already happened. Letting go of justice does not mean you deny the hurt. It doesn't mean you forget what happened. It doesn't mean the other person was right. It means you stop letting the need for them to be punished control your life. Because when you stay attached to retribution, you keep the wound alive. You keep binding your peace to someone else's awakening, and that's a prison. This craving often hides behind the idea of morality. We tell ourselves it's about what's fair, what's ethical, what's deserved. But deeper down, it's often about validation. We want the harm acknowledged. We want our pain to be seen. We want to feel that the universe, or someone, is on our side. And when that doesn't happen, we suffer again, not from the original harm, but from the meaning we keep giving to it. Letting go doesn't mean giving in. It means refusing to stay entangled. It means recognizing that the past cannot be undone, no matter how vivid your memory is. The desire for someone else's accountability is understandable, but waiting for it keeps your life on hold. Compassion is the only energy that can unbind this loop. Not because it excuses behavior, but because it releases you from hatred. Compassion sees the ignorance that causes harm. It sees how pain breeds pain. It doesn't justify it, but it understands its roots. And that understanding cuts the cycle. When someone harms you and you hold on to anger for years, you don't punish them, you punish yourself. Your nervous system remains in defense. Your thoughts stay stuck in the past. You cannot rest because your heart believes justice must happen before peace is allowed. But peace doesn't wait. It arrives when you make space for it. This doesn't mean you don't speak up. It means you speak from clarity, not rage. It means your actions come from inner steadiness, not emotional chaos. Letting go gives you the strength to respond without needing to destroy. It gives you the ability to choose how you show up, even when others fall short. Justice, rooted in compassion, looks different than revenge. It doesn't seek punishment for its own sake. It seeks healing. It aims for restoration, not domination. It cares more about preventing future harm than proving a point. This kind of justice can only come from those who have touched their own pain and chosen not to pass it on. There's also a quiet danger in letting bitterness become identity. You begin to define yourself by what was done to you. You carry the story like armor. You tell it often. You center your energy around it. And while your story is valid, it is not all of who you are. When you let the craving for justice harden, you risk becoming trapped in the very energy that hurt you. Compassion doesn't remove boundaries. In fact, it strengthens them. It says, I see the harm. I will not repeat it. I will not allow it to continue, but I will not carry hatred as my response. That is real strength. That is the kind of justice that heals. True letting go means you stop arguing with the past. You stop needing the person who hurt you to become different before you can rest. You stop believing that your peace is owed to you by someone who may never be capable of giving it. You take back responsibility for your inner life, not because it's fair, but because it's the only way to be free. And freedom does not mean forgetting. It means remembering without the weight. It means seeing clearly what happened and choosing not to be defined by it. It means feeling the pain and still choosing to live, to care, to open. You may still feel the longing for justice. That's human. But you no longer believe that justice will fix what's broken inside. You understand that some harm cannot be undone, that the closure you seek might never come from outside. And so you create your own closure, not through revenge, but through release. This process requires courage, not the kind that fights, but the kind that forgives, the kind that walks away from reactivity, from bitterness, from the endless hope that one day it will all make sense. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes they won't apologize. Sometimes life is not fair. And still, you can choose not to live as a victim. You can choose to offer compassion, even if only inwardly. You can choose to protect your energy. You can choose to stop holding someone else's mistake inside your body. The most radical form of justice is to live well, to heal, to grow, to become the kind of person who doesn't return harm with harm. That doesn't mean being passive. It means being deeply awake, awake enough to break the chain, awake enough to not mirror what wounded you. This is the justice Buddhism points to, not retribution, but transformation, not punishment, but liberation. You change the world by first changing how you meet your own pain. And in that change, you model something rare. A heart that has been through fire and still chooses not to burn others. A mind that has known suffering and still chooses peace. A life that could have closed down, but instead chose to open. Letting go of the craving for justice does not make you weak. It makes you clear. And in that clarity, you reclaim the power that was never truly lost, only hidden beneath the desire to be made right by someone else. You don't need their recognition to validate your truth. You don't need revenge to confirm your worth. You don't need life to be fair to know that healing is possible. You only need to turn inward, to hold your pain like something sacred, to breathe through the anger until it softens, to trust that your peace is not dependent on someone else's awakening. Because when you stop needing justice to arrive in the form you imagined, you make space for a different kind of justice to grow. The justice of not continuing the pain, the justice of no longer waiting for permission to live fully. That kind of justice doesn't shout, it doesn't seek applause, but it leaves a mark far deeper than punishment ever could. It ends cycles, it closes wounds, and it opens the way forward, not just for you, but for everyone around you. After releasing the weight of needing justice to come from outside, there's a deep shift that takes place. Your center moves inward. There's more room to breathe, to feel, to simply be. But for many, something unexpected takes its place. A new kind of striving, one that feels noble, even sacred, one that wears robes instead of armor, speaks softly instead of shouting, but still grips tightly underneath. It is the hunger to be spiritually better, to be awakened, to be free, to be special. It is the ego hiding inside the quest for enlightenment. It doesn't always announce itself. It starts subtly. You want peace, so you meditate more. You want wisdom, so you study deeply. You want to heal, so you try harder to be calm, kind, and aware. And all of that can be sincere. But sometimes, without realizing it, your spiritual practice becomes another project for the self, another way to measure progress, another system for proving that you are enough. This is where the ego becomes clever. It drops the language of success and achievement and picks up the language of consciousness and transformation. But the underlying hunger stays the same. It says, I will finally be okay when I'm enlightened. I will finally be worthy when I've healed every wound. I will finally have peace when I transcend everything human. That idea is seductive, but it's also another trap. Because the more you chase awakening as a goal, the more distance you create between yourself and the truth of your own nature. You turn the spiritual path into another ladder, a way to rise above others, a way to earn inner approval, a way to fix yourself by becoming something more. But in every authentic spiritual tradition, the real freedom comes not from gaining more, but from letting go. Not from becoming extraordinary, but from realizing you were never separate from what you sought. Spiritual ambition can make the ego feel subtle and safe. You can be admired for your commitment. You can feel superior for being more aware. You can judge others for being less mindful or less advanced. And suddenly, without meaning to, your practice becomes performance. Your progress becomes identity. And your path becomes another way to protect the very self you once wanted to dissolve. This doesn't mean practice is wrong. It doesn't mean effort should stop. It means the motivation behind it needs to be seen clearly. Are you meditating to be free or to become someone who looks free? Are you seeking truth or just comfort? Are you trying to be awakened, or are you trying to be better than your past self? These questions are not to shame you. They're to return you to what is real. Because when practice becomes another achievement, suffering returns. Only now it hides under the language of growth. In Buddhism, the idea of non-attachment applies not just to material things, but to spiritual identity. Even the belief, I am spiritual, becomes a form of clinging. Even the desire to be free can become grasping if it's built on the idea that you are not enough as you are. Letting go of spiritual ambition doesn't mean abandoning the path. It means releasing the identity that tries to use the path as proof of worth. It means you stop needing to become enlightened and start noticing the clarity already present in this breath, in this moment, in this body, not in a future version of you, but right here. This shift brings humility, not the kind that feels low, but the kind that feels true. You stop needing to talk about how much you've grown. You stop needing people to see your progress. You stop measuring how far you've come. You simply practice because you love truth. You love presence. You love peace, not as a prize, but as your nature. And in that love, there's no rush, no timeline, no pressure to reach milestones. You let go of the finish line. You drop the comparisons. You begin to realize that the path is not about improvement. It's about intimacy with what already is. Even enlightenment, when seen as a goal, becomes distorted. The mind imagines it as an achievement, a moment of total bliss, of perfect awareness, of no more pain. But in reality, awakening is not the end of feeling. It's the end of resisting feeling. It's not the absence of self. It's the recognition that the self was always a movement, not a fixed thing. This understanding dissolves the need to perfect yourself. You stop waiting to be worthy of stillness. You stop waiting to be clean enough for silence. You see that even your longing to be pure is just another thought arising and passing. And when you don't grab it, it fades, and what remains is already whole. Letting go of spiritual ambition allows space for honesty. You don't have to pretend to be further along than you are. You don't have to hide your confusion or avoid your doubt. You can bring your whole self to the practice, not just the polished parts, but the raw and unfinished ones too. And in doing that, you experience what it means to be truly present, not spiritually advanced, just awake to this moment. Ego dissolves not by force, but by exposure. When you shine light on its strategies, how it tries to use spirituality as a shield, you begin to loosen its grip. You begin to see that the one chasing freedom was never bound, that the one seeking peace was made of it all along. There's also tenderness in letting go of the ambition, because underneath the drive to awaken is often a deep fatigue, a longing to rest, a wish to just be, without needing to prove anything anymore. And that rest is not laziness. It's truth. It's the stillness that spiritual effort was pointing toward all along. You realize that the practice is not a race. It's not about becoming better at being spiritual. It's about becoming so quiet that the need to become falls away. And in that falling away, you meet yourself again, not as an idea, but as presence. Not as a concept, but as awareness. This doesn't mean you'll never feel the pull of ambition again, but now you'll see it. You'll smile at it. You'll know that even that pull is just another ripple in the mind, and when you don't chase it, it loses its power. From this space, the heart opens more naturally. You stop using practice to escape being human and start using it to embrace being fully alive. You allow yourself to feel sadness, joy, confusion, peace, not as signs of failure or success, but as part of the flow. You are no longer performing awakening. You are embodying it. And that embodiment is quiet. It doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't even need to be named. It just is. Letting go of spiritual ambition also changes how you relate to others on the path. You no longer judge them by how advanced they seem. You stop assuming that someone's words reflect their depth. You stop comparing teachings like trophies. You listen more. You expect less. You respect the silence between the words as much as the teachings themselves. You begin to feel a new kind of respect, not based on status or knowledge, but on sincerity. You value humility more than eloquence. You recognize the wisdom in simplicity. And most importantly, you trust your own quiet knowing. Not because it's proven, but because it's true. This shift doesn't remove discipline. It refines it. You still sit. You still reflect. You still return. But you do it out of devotion, not pressure. Out of love, not lack. And in that love, something deep begins to bloom. Not achievement, not perfection, but presence. That presence becomes your anchor, your home, your truth. And once you taste it, not as a concept, but as lived reality, you no longer need to chase awakening, because you know it's not elsewhere. It never was. It's not hidden in more knowledge. It's not waiting in another retreat. It's not something earned. It's this breath, this silence, this ordinary, sacred now. After releasing the pressure of spiritual ambition, what remains is not emptiness, but openness. Without the need to strive, without the need to become, there is space, raw, unfiltered, and deeply real. In this space, the mind softens. But something else begins to stir. A quiet ache. The places in the heart that were hidden behind the need to succeed. The pain that ambition helped mask. The memories still waiting to be felt. When you stop running forward, you begin to feel what was left behind. This is where true healing begins, not with fixing, but with meeting, not through analysis, but through love, not the fleeting love of emotion, but the steady warmth of presence. And in Buddhist practice, this kind of healing love has a name: metta. Often translated as loving kindness, metta is not sentiment. It's not sweetness. It's the deliberate cultivation of unconditional care, starting with yourself, extending to others, and reaching even those who have hurt you. For those carrying deep wounds, this may sound impossible, especially if the pain feels buried, forgotten, or too overwhelming to name. Trauma creates disconnection. It fragments memory, numbs emotion, and builds protective walls around vulnerability. It convinces you that kindness is unsafe, that softness is weakness. But what trauma divides Metta gently begins to weave back together. The practice doesn't demand you feel warmth immediately. It simply asks that you stay, that you offer presence, that you repeat the intention even when your heart feels closed. You begin where you are, even if what's here is numbness. You say the words, not because you already believe them, but because you're planting seeds. Words like, may I be safe, may I be well, may I be free from suffering. These are not affirmations, they are invitations. Each time you repeat them, something shifts. The nervous system begins to relax. The protective tension begins to loosen. The parts of you that felt unlovable begin to come forward. Not because they're healed, but because now they trust they will not be judged. Metta creates safety from the inside, not by removing pain, but by offering a space large enough to hold it. This is essential for trauma recovery. So often, trauma is kept alive by a sense of isolation. The inner child believes they are alone in the wound. Metta brings company. It reminds the body that connection is possible, even if it was missing in the past. You might feel resistance at first. The mind might say, I don't deserve this, or this won't help. That's expected. Trauma teaches the brain to expect danger, even in kindness. But the practice is not about forcing a breakthrough. It's about creating repetition, a steady rhythm of care that begins to override the old scripts. Over time, the messages change. The harsh inner critic becomes quieter. The shame begins to soften. And what's left is not perfection, but tenderness. Not closure, but openness. This practice doesn't bypass pain. It brings you closer to it, but with support. It teaches you how to stay without collapsing, how to feel without being overwhelmed. It builds the muscle of compassion, not just as a feeling, but as an action. One of the most powerful aspects of metta is that it doesn't stop with the self. It expands outward. First, to someone you love, then to someone neutral, then to someone difficult. This expansion is not just about generosity, it's about integration. Trauma often keeps the heart guarded. Metta slowly teaches it to open again, to risk connection, to trust presence, to include others in your circle of care. This doesn't mean forcing forgiveness. It means releasing the inner contract that says, I must stay in pain to stay safe. That belief is common after trauma. Metta shows another way. It says, you can care and protect yourself at the same time. You can feel deeply and still be safe. The simplicity of the practice is its strength. You don't need to relive every memory. You don't need to fix the past. You meet what's here. You stay. You offer the words, and the healing grows in the repetition, not the intensity. This becomes a new internal pattern. Instead of spiraling into fear or shame, the mind begins to return to care. Instead of isolating, you connect inwardly. Instead of suppressing, you allow. The nervous system learns safety. The body learns trust. The heart learns openness. This is especially helpful for those who feel numb or shut down. Trauma doesn't always feel like pain. It can feel like nothing, like disconnection, like emptiness. Metta doesn't force feeling to return. It welcomes the numbness too. It says, even this is worthy of care. In doing so, it creates the conditions for feeling to re-emerge gently. Like thawing ice, the heart begins to move again, And with that movement comes grief, tenderness, sometimes joy. Not all at once, and not in predictable order, but slowly, over time, the inner world becomes more alive. This practice also supports boundaries. Often, people confuse loving kindness with passivity, but true metta includes wisdom. It doesn't mean allowing harm. It doesn't mean staying silent. It means acting from clarity, not reactivity. It means saying no with love, walking away with care, and speaking truth without aggression. It also means extending compassion to the parts of yourself that made mistakes. Many who carry trauma also carry guilt, especially for how they coped, how they survived, or how they hurt others while they were in pain. Metta includes these parts. It says, "You were doing what you could with what you knew." It holds you without conditions. It allows repair without punishment. As the practice deepens, it naturally begins to flow beyond your own experience. You begin to notice others more. You sense their pain, their longing, not as something separate, but as something shared. This doesn't burden you, it connects you. It reminds you that healing is not only individual, it's collective. The more love you offer inward, the more capacity you have to hold the world. Metta becomes a way of moving, a way of being. It shapes how you speak, how you listen, how you rest. And as you live from this place, you begin to rewrite the nervous system's story. The story that once said, "I must stay small to stay safe." Now it says, "I can be whole, I can be soft, I can be free." And that freedom doesn't come from a single insight. It comes from staying, from saying the words again and again, even when they feel empty, from choosing love when the old habit would be to close, from offering kindness, not because you feel healed, but because you deserve healing. In time, metta becomes more than a practice. It becomes your nature, revealed, not because you forced yourself to be good, but because you stopped believing you had to be hard. You stopped thinking love was something to earn. You began to trust that it was something you already carried. And with each breath, each phrase, each moment of tenderness, that trust deepens. The heart that was once guarded begins to open. Not wide, not all at once, but enough. Enough to feel again, enough to live again, enough to let the past rest. Metta does not erase the wound. It teaches the heart how to hold it gently. And in that holding, something unbinds, not through force, but through love, not through escape, but through presence. This is how healing happens. One breath, one word, one quiet, brave return to kindness at a time. As loving kindness begins to unbind the heart and gentleness becomes something you no longer resist, another invitation naturally appears. It is not loud, it does not demand attention, but it speaks clearly. After softening toward the pain, after meeting yourself with compassion, the next question is not about how much more to add, but how much can be released. Not how to build more comfort, but how to live with less burden. This is the path of renunciation, not as rejection, but as freedom. In a world built on accumulation, renunciation feels radical. We are taught that more is always better, more achievement, more status, more possessions, more productivity, even more healing. Life becomes a constant reaching, a chase without end. But somewhere inside, the body knows there's a cost. The nervous system tightens, the mind gets louder, the heart grows heavy under the weight of everything we think we must carry. Renunciation is not about deprivation. It is about discernment. It's the willingness to look honestly at your life and ask, what no longer serves? What takes more than it gives? What have I been told I need that actually keeps me disconnected? Letting go is often harder than striving, not because it requires effort, but because it requires trust. You're not pushing towards something, you're stepping back, you're creating space, and in that space, clarity arises. Renunciation is the art of creating space for what matters by releasing what doesn't. This includes physical things. Living in a world of constant advertising and comparison, we absorb the message that happiness is just one more purchase away. But happiness rooted in things always shifts. What was once exciting becomes normal. What was once new becomes old. The mind adapts, then asks for more. This cycle never completes itself. Renunciation interrupts that loop. It invites a conscious relationship with what you own and why. It asks whether your things serve your peace or whether they distract you from it. Simplifying your environment changes how your mind functions. Fewer possessions mean fewer choices to make. Less clutter means less distraction. Simplicity brings stillness, and stillness brings depth. With fewer outer demands, your inner world becomes more spacious. There's more room to listen, more room to feel, more room to live fully where you are, without constantly reaching for what's next. But renunciation is not limited to material things. It's also about letting go of emotional habits. The need for approval, the craving for constant validation, the impulse to control. These patterns feel like protection, but they often block real connection. Renunciation in this context means choosing authenticity over image, silence over reaction, presence over performance. One of the most transformative forms of renunciation is releasing the need to always be busy. Busyness is often mistaken for importance, but constant motion doesn't equal meaning. In fact, it often hides a deep discomfort with stillness. When you renounce busyness, you begin to live in rhythm with life instead of racing against it. You do less, but with more awareness, more presence, more care. This also applies to relationships. Sometimes, renunciation means stepping back from dynamics that drain you, not out of judgment, but out of love for your own peace. It means recognizing where your energy is being pulled into drama, resentment, or caretaking roles that leave you depleted. Letting go doesn't always mean walking away. It can also mean releasing expectations, attachments, or unspoken contracts that have kept you locked in pain. Renunciation is not a punishment. It's a return to your natural state before conditioning taught you to need more than you actually do. This return feels like rest. It feels like remembering how to breathe deeply, how to appreciate without owning, how to enjoy without clinging. The fear of letting go is real. It can feel like losing part of yourself, but the truth is, you're only losing the illusions that never brought peace. The more you release, the more clearly you see that most of what you thought you needed was never essential. And what's left? The presence, the love, the quiet aliveness. That's what remains real. Modern life celebrates accumulation, but in truth, the most content people are often those who have chosen simplicity, not out of lack, but from wisdom. They know that attention is their most valuable resource, and they protect it fiercely. They are intentional about where their energy goes. They are selective with what they say yes to, and because of that, their presence is deeper, their relationships richer, their lives fuller. This kind of renunciation doesn't isolate you from the world. It returns you to it more fully. You are no longer distracted by surface wants. You're no longer pulled in every direction by every impulse. You move slowly. You listen deeply. You are able to respond to life rather than react to it. This doesn't mean you stop having desires. It means your desires become clearer, more aligned. You may still want beauty, connection, even comfort, but not at the cost of your peace. You no longer chase intensity. You value consistency. You no longer need everything to be extraordinary. You learn to find the sacred in the ordinary. Renunciation also brings a unique kind of strength. The strength to walk away from what no longer serves. The strength to say no when the world wants more of you. The strength to value your inner life more than your outer image. This strength is not aggressive. It's quiet, but it's powerful. When you live with less, you discover how much is already within you. You stop seeking outside what you can cultivate inside. Peace, joy, contentment. These become less dependent on circumstance and more grounded in awareness. You realize that freedom is not something added, it's something uncovered. In this light, renunciation becomes a form of love. Love for yourself, love for the truth, love for what remains when all the noise is gone. It's not a rejection of life, it's a deeper embrace of it. A willingness to say, I no longer need everything, I just need what's true. And in choosing less, you open to more of what matters. More stillness, more clarity, more real connection, more depth. The absence of excess makes room for what's essential. This path isn't about having nothing, it's about being free from needing everything. It's about no longer being pulled in directions that scatter your energy. It's about learning to rest in what's enough. That enoughness becomes your new foundation. You stop waiting for someday. You stop trying to prove your worth. You begin to enjoy what's already here. And in that enjoyment, something unexpected arises. Gratitude, not for more, but for what is. Renunciation invites this gratitude. It invites presence. It invites real freedom, not the freedom to have anything, but the freedom to not need it. This is the power of choosing less, not as sacrifice, but as healing, not as lack, but as liberation. After choosing less, after releasing what weighs you down, the mind becomes still enough to notice something subtler, something hidden, not in your outer life, but deep within your perception itself. There's a flicker of doubt, a quiet wondering, if letting go of things brings peace, what else have I mistaken as real? What if the suffering I hold on to isn't solid? What if my entire sense of reality is shaped by the stories I've never questioned? This is where the practice turns inward in a new way, not just into thoughts, emotions, or behavior, but into perception itself. And perhaps no teaching reveals this more directly than dream yoga. Rooted in the deepest layers of Tibetan Buddhism, This practice is not about analyzing dreams or decoding symbols. It's about waking up, first in the dream, then in waking life. It's about seeing that the same qualities that define your dreams, impermanence, instability, emptiness, also define the so-called real world. In both states, things appear. You feel emotions, you experience time, you form beliefs. But in dreams, the illusion eventually breaks. You wake up and see that the events were never really happening. What if the same insight could apply to your waking suffering, not to deny pain, but to understand its lack of fixed nature? What if every moment of reactivity, every story you cling to, every identity you build, is just another dream? The practice of dream yoga begins with lucidity. This means knowing within the dream that you are dreaming, not in theory, but in experience. This requires training your awareness to be stable enough that it carries through the thresholds of sleep. It starts with mindfulness throughout the day, noticing habits, questioning assumptions, asking often, "Am I awake right now? What am I believing without proof?" This habit slowly enters the dream state. Eventually, you will dream and ask the same question, and in that moment, you may see something shift. The room becomes vivid, the fear dissolves, the storyline softens. You realize it's not real, and in that realization, you gain the power to move freely, to observe without fear, to act without clinging. But dream yoga doesn't stop at control. It goes deeper. Once you become lucid, you don't just fly or change the scene. You sit with the experience. You notice how quickly it changes. You observe how thoughts shape your environment. You feel emotions arise without external cause. And this teaches you something radical. Consciousness is not passive. It creates, it responds, it interprets. And in both dreams and waking life, your suffering is not always about what's happening, it's about how your mind is reacting. Dream yoga shows you how often you mistake projections for truth. A person in a dream yells and you feel shame or fear until you wake up and realize it was your own mind playing both roles. In waking life, the same dynamic happens. Someone triggers you and your reaction feels justified. But what if you're still asleep? What if you're reacting to an image you've built, not the reality itself? When you train in this way, sleep becomes part of the path. You no longer lose those hours. You explore them. You observe the patterns that emerge when the rational mind rests. You may meet old fears, long-buried wounds, characters from your life, and instead of fighting them or escaping, you bring awareness. You stay present. You learn to say, "This is a dream. I am aware." This doesn't just benefit sleep. It changes your waking life. You become less reactive, less certain, more open. You begin to question the solidity of your thoughts, the certainty of your judgments. You see how much of what you call truth is actually interpretation. And this insight becomes healing, because so much of suffering comes from taking things personally, from believing every insult, every failure, every regret is a permanent mark on your identity. But dream yoga shows you identities are fluid, experiences are fleeting. Nothing holds you except your belief in the story. This also opens a doorway into death. In Tibetan tradition, the dream state is seen as a rehearsal for the moment of dying. At death, consciousness separates from the body and enters a bardo, or intermediate state, similar to dreaming. If you have trained to be lucid in dreams, you may recognize the same patterns after death. You may stay aware instead of being swept away by fear or confusion. This gives you choice, not only in this life, but in what follows. But even if you don't believe in other realms, the relevance remains. Every day, you fall asleep. Every day, your world dissolves. Dream yoga teaches you how to be conscious in that letting go, how to witness without needing to grasp, how to see that even when the story disappears, awareness remains. In waking life, this awareness becomes your ground. You stop depending on circumstances for your peace. You stop needing certainty. You can feel deeply without being consumed. You can think clearly without being rigid. You can move through difficulty without clinging to identity. This is not detachment. It's intimacy. You stop mistaking your projections for people. You start meeting others as they are, not as who you think they are, not as characters in your internal script, but as beings also trying to wake up. Dream yoga also reveals how suffering multiplies when you believe illusions are real. In a nightmare, you run, you scream, you fear for your life, until you realize you're dreaming. Then, the fear vanishes. Not because the image disappeared, but because your belief did. The same shift can happen with emotional pain. When you see that the story feeding the pain is not solid, the suffering loosens. It may still arise, but it passes. You are no longer trapped inside it. This practice also teaches compassion. Because once you see how often you're lost in illusion, you understand others more deeply. You stop judging their behavior so quickly. You see how people act from their own dreams, from fear, conditioning, and unconscious beliefs. This doesn't mean excusing harm, but it allows you to meet others with more softness. You stop needing to fix everyone. You start focusing on waking up yourself. Lucid dreaming is not the goal, it's the doorway. The real practice is how you relate to what arises. Whether in sleep or in waking, your mind is the same. Dream yoga gives you tools to explore its nature, to see thought as thought, emotion as energy, identity as process. It asks nothing more than this: to wake up right here, wherever you are. You don't need to become a perfect dreamer to benefit. Even the effort to become lucid changes your awareness. You question more, you pause more, you listen more, and over time, the illusion of control fades, replaced by a deeper kind of trust. Not in a plan, not in a person, but in the unfolding of experience itself. Trust, in this sense, is not passive. It's presence. It's the ability to stay awake even when life surprises you, to respond instead of react, to hold both beauty and loss with the same steady breath. This is the deeper healing, not from escaping suffering, but from seeing its lack of solidity, from meeting it like a dream, real in sensation, but empty in essence. And in that meeting, you begin to relax, to let go, to move through life without needing to grip every thought, every story, every role. You start to live not from fear of falling asleep again, but from a growing confidence that awareness is always available. That clarity is always near, that every moment is a chance to return, to see more clearly, to suffer less. This is not a belief, it's a practice. You train your mind in the day so you can wake up at night. You learn from your dreams so you can live more consciously while awake. And eventually, the line between waking and dreaming blurs. You stop needing to separate them. You live lucidly in every moment, not perfectly, not dramatically, but gently, consistently, with awareness. And from that awareness, you live differently. You speak with care. You listen with openness. You walk through both joy and grief with the same quiet knowing. This, too, is part of the dream. This, too, will pass. But you, the awareness behind it all, remain steady, awake, free. As the dream begins to dissolve and the boundaries between waking and sleeping lose their sharpness, another illusion quietly rises to the surface, one even harder to see because you've been taught to believe it's who you are. It's not a fleeting thought or emotion. It's not a dream image or memory. It's the story you carry each day without even noticing. The one that starts with two simple words: I am. There is power in those words. They shape your perception. They influence your decisions. They define your relationships. But when they become fixed, when your sense of self gets locked inside a specific role, they begin to limit you. The more you believe, I am this, the more you suffer when life challenges that belief. This isn't about ego in the usual sense. It's about identity, who you think you have to be to feel safe, valued, or worthy. These identities often come from roles. I am a parent. I am a partner. I am a leader. I am a healer. I am the one who holds it all together. These roles can feel noble. Sometimes they are even necessary. But when you forget they are roles, they become prisons. You don't just play the part. You become it. And when life moves on, when the children grow, the relationship ends, the job changes, the health declines, you feel lost. You grieve not just the change, but the sense of self tied to it. Letting go of identity doesn't mean becoming no one. It means learning to relate to roles with awareness. It means seeing them as temporary expressions, not fixed truths. It means remembering that you were whole before any role was assigned to you. The pain of identity clinging often begins early. A child learns to receive love by being good, quiet, successful, or strong. That behavior becomes a mask, and the mask becomes a role. Over time, the child forgets where the role ends and the self begins. This creates internal conflict. Even in adulthood, part of you still seeks validation through the same lens. You work harder, you give more, you become the caretaker, the achiever, the one who always says yes, even when you're breaking inside. And yet, behind all of this effort is often a silent fear. If I stop being this, who will I be? This fear is understandable. Identity gives structure. It gives direction. It helps navigate relationships. But the problem begins when you confuse structure for self, when the map becomes the territory, when the label becomes the limit. The Buddhist path offers a different view. It teaches that identity is not fixed. It arises through conditions. It's a process, not a product. You're not a static person. You are a continuous unfolding of causes and effects. Your preferences, roles, thoughts, and habits are not you. They are experiences moving through you. This insight is not just conceptual, it brings freedom, because once you stop holding identity so tightly, you can respond to life more skillfully. You don't have to protect an image. You don't have to defend a label. You can be flexible. You can adapt. You can rest. This flexibility is essential for healing. When you cling to being the strong one, you suppress your vulnerability. When you cling to being the wise one, you avoid saying, "I don't know." When you cling to being the caregiver, you lose connection with your own needs. The role keeps you useful, but it also keeps you distant from yourself and others. Letting go begins with awareness. Start noticing how you describe yourself. What roles feel essential to your worth? What identities are you afraid to lose? Which ones bring you stress when they're challenged? Simply noticing is powerful. You don't have to drop the role overnight. You just stop believing it's the whole truth. This also applies to how others see you. So much suffering comes from trying to maintain a role in someone else's story. You want to be the perfect partner, the perfect parent, the dependable friend. But when your sense of peace depends on someone else's view of you, you become fragile. You're constantly adjusting, performing, shape-shifting to avoid rejection. Freedom comes when you stop needing to be seen a certain way, when you stop needing to live up to an image, when you stop needing to be the person everyone expects. That doesn't mean becoming distant. It means becoming real. And being real sometimes means being uncertain. Sometimes it means failing, letting go, saying no, or stepping back. These actions may not fit your role, but they often align more with your truth. You also begin to see how identity creates conflict. The stronger the label, the more tightly you hold your view. You see yourself as the good one, and someone else becomes the bad one. You see yourself as the victim, and someone else becomes the enemy. These polarities keep the heart closed. They lock you into stories that are hard to leave, even when they no longer serve. Letting go of identity opens space for compassion. You stop seeing people as opposites and start seeing shared humanity. You stop relating from roles and start relating from presence. This changes relationships profoundly. There's less drama, less control, more listening, more respect. It also softens your inner dialogue. You stop attacking yourself for falling short of your role. You stop judging every mistake. You begin to meet yourself where you are, not where you think you should be. You become kinder, not because you've earned it, but because you're no longer trying to uphold an image. This doesn't mean all roles disappear. You may still be a parent, a teacher, a leader, but now you play the role without becoming it. You hold it lightly. You move in and out of it. You serve without being consumed. You give without being defined by what you give. You also become more resilient. When life takes a role away, you don't collapse. You grieve, you adjust, you move forward. Because you never thought the role was you. You knew it was temporary. You knew your worth was deeper. This insight also brings humility. Without a fixed identity, you stop comparing constantly. You no longer need to be better than others. You no longer measure your worth against anyone. You don't have to win to feel valid. You don't have to prove anything. You're already enough. And from that enoughness, life becomes simpler. You say yes when it's true. You say no when it's kind. You speak not to be seen, but to be honest. You listen without defending. You live without pretending. Letting go of identity roles doesn't make you invisible. It makes you transparent. People see you more clearly. You become easier to be around. Your energy becomes steady because you're no longer holding so tightly to an image. This practice is subtle, The ego will still whisper. It will still try to protect a sense of self. That's okay. You meet it with awareness, with patience, with humor. And slowly, the grip loosens. You return again and again to what's real, not the label, but the presence behind it. That presence cannot be named. It cannot be measured. It doesn't need a title. It just is. And from that place, you begin to live, not as a role, but as yourself. Soft, clear, free. As the grip of roles loosens, as the identities you once defended begin to soften and dissolve, something else often emerges from the silence. It's not a stranger. It's a voice you've heard before, many times. It speaks in the quiet after effort, in the moments of doubt, in the pauses where you might otherwise rest. It sounds like your own thoughts, but sharper, quicker, always watching, always judging. This is the inner critic, not because you invited it, but because somewhere along the way it took up residence in your mind. It became your internal compass, not one that points to truth, but one that constantly questions your worth. It reminds you of your flaws. It repeats old criticisms. It says things you would never say to someone you love, and still, you believe it. This voice doesn't come from nowhere. It forms through years of conditioning, words you heard from others, cultural standards, family expectations, personal trauma. It builds itself from the need to be safe. If you can judge yourself first, maybe others won't hurt you. If you can spot your flaws before someone else points them out, maybe you'll avoid shame. But this strategy comes at a cost. It creates an internal tension that never goes away. Even when you succeed, the critic finds something lacking. Even when you're kind, it says it wasn't enough. Even when you rest, it whispers that you should be doing more. Buddhism offers a different way to meet this voice, not by fighting it, not by believing it, but by bringing compassion to it. This compassion is called karuna. Unlike ordinary kindness, karuna doesn't require you to feel good about yourself. It simply asks you to stay with suffering, yours or someone else's, with gentleness. Karuna sees the inner critic not as an enemy, but as a part of you that is afraid. It doesn't excuse its harshness, but it understands its roots. It knows that the critic developed when you were too young to protect yourself, or when your value was tied to performance, or when love felt conditional. Meeting this voice with karuna begins by noticing its presence. You become aware of how it speaks. You name its tone. You see how quickly it appears when you're vulnerable. And you pause, not to agree, not to push it away, but to recognize this voice is suffering speaking through fear. Then, instead of pushing back, you create space. You breathe. You soften. You might even place a hand on your heart or say words that comfort a scared child, not because the critic deserves kindness, but because the part of you it attacks does. Karuna is not weakness. It's strength that doesn't need to dominate. It listens without collapsing. It speaks without punishing. It holds the pain without becoming consumed by it. This approach also helps you see the difference between awareness and judgment. Awareness notices when something is harmful and gently points you back to clarity. Judgment says you are the harm, that you'll never be enough, that your flaws are your identity. Karuna works like a mirror that doesn't distort. It reflects what's true, but it doesn't exaggerate. It says, yes, that was painful. Yes, that was unskillful. But you're still worthy of love. You're still part of this world. You're still allowed to grow. This becomes especially important during moments of failure. When things go wrong, the critic usually speaks the loudest. It shames you into silence. It tells you not to try again. But when you meet it with karuna, you can respond differently. You don't shrink. You don't lash out. You acknowledge the mistake. You learn from it. And you keep going. Karuna also transforms how you speak to others, because the inner critic doesn't stay inside. When you judge yourself harshly, you tend to judge others too. When you expect perfection from yourself, you unconsciously expect it from those around you. Compassion for yourself creates space for others to be human. This doesn't mean ignoring harm. Karuna includes wisdom. It allows you to hold people accountable while remembering their complexity, and it begins with holding yourself the same way. You stop needing to be perfect to be at peace. You stop needing to prove your goodness in every moment. Practicing karuna takes time. The critic is fast. It's practiced. It often speaks before you can intervene. But over time, you can slow the reaction. You can notice the voice, pause, and choose something different. A breath, a touch, a reminder. You say, "I see you, I hear you, but I don't believe you." You also begin to ask where the voice came from. Whose voice is it echoing? Is it a parent, a teacher, a culture, a religion? You start to see that this critic was not born with you. It was built around you. And what was built can be seen, held, and softened. This process does not remove the critic overnight, but it changes your relationship to it. You stop giving it full control. You stop letting it dictate your value. You begin to lead with compassion, not defense. Some days, the voice will still be strong, especially during stress or transition. That's okay. You're not failing. You're practicing. Each time you bring karuna to that moment, you heal a little more. You reclaim space that was once filled with shame. You also stop waiting to be better before you offer yourself care. You don't postpone self-kindness until you meet a standard. You don't demand progress before rest. You begin to care for yourself not because you've earned it, but because you're breathing, because you're here, because that's reason enough. This shift also supports emotional healing. The inner critic often keeps old pain locked away. It tells you that your sadness is weakness, your fear is drama, your grief is too much. But karuna says the opposite. It says, you are allowed to feel. You are allowed to hurt. You are allowed to heal slowly. That permission is powerful. It allows buried emotion to rise, not as an enemy, but as something to be felt and freed. It makes healing possible, not through force, but through presence. Karuna does not require that you like every part of yourself. It simply asks that you stop abandoning them. It says, even this deserves to be seen, even this deserves to be held. And in that holding, transformation happens. Not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. You begin to see that your worth was never up for debate, that the inner critic was wrong, not evil, but wrong, that your value is not dependent on perfection, that your wholeness is not conditional. This becomes your new ground, not the absence of doubt, but the presence of compassion. Not the silence of the critic, but your willingness to meet it with care. And from this ground, you live differently. You take risks. You try again. You speak honestly. You rest without guilt. You say no without shame. You love without needing to earn it. Karuna becomes your default setting, not because life gets easier, but because you no longer make it harder by attacking yourself along the way. That is what it means to tame the inner critic, not to silence it through willpower, but to soften it through understanding, to let compassion speak louder, to let your own heart be safe within itself. After learning to meet the harshness of the inner voice with compassion instead of resistance, something inside begins to soften. But as the mind settles and judgment fades, another layer often reveals itself, one that doesn't speak in words or logic. It lives in the body, in tension that never fully releases, in heaviness that has no name, in restlessness that lingers even in silence. This is the layer that cannot be solved by thought. It must be moved through, felt, released. When stillness is no longer enough, the body offers another path: walking meditation. This practice brings the wisdom of the mind and the intelligence of the body together. It is not simply walking slowly. It is not about physical exercise. It is awareness in motion. It is the act of coming home to your body with every step, letting movement become a way to process what words cannot touch. There are emotions the mind has outgrown, but the body still carries. Grief stored in the shoulders, fear held in the belly, shame trapped in posture. These patterns are not mental, they are lived. The body remembers everything, even when the mind forgets, and the only way to release them is to move with intention, to bring presence into movement so awareness can meet what's stored without pressure, without judgment. Walking meditation is a practice of deliberate simplicity. Each step is slow, mindful, rooted in breath. You walk not to arrive somewhere, but to fully inhabit where you are. Your foot touches the ground and you feel it. You notice the weight, the shift, the contact. You become aware of balance, of rhythm, of gravity. With each step, you are invited to let go, not conceptually, but physically. This practice allows energy to move. The emotions that stay stuck when you sit in silence often begin to rise gently as you walk, not because you push, but because the body trusts movement. You aren't trying to fix anything. You're simply staying close to yourself while the body remembers how to let go. You may notice memories appear, or sadness with no story, or a sense of unease that has no name. In walking meditation, you don't need to interpret. You don't need to explain. You walk with it. You stay present. And with each breath, each step, each shift in weight, you allow space for the experience to unfold and resolve on its own. There's no destination. The goal is the movement itself. This retrains your nervous system to understand that you don't need to rush to feel better. You don't need to get away from discomfort. You can move slowly with it, with dignity, with compassion. This is deeply healing for those who have felt trapped in stillness. Some people find seated meditation too intense, the silence too sharp, the stillness too much. Walking meditation offers a different rhythm, one that's more forgiving, more grounded. It invites the whole body into practice, not just the mind. There's a natural wisdom in rhythm. The repetitive act of walking creates a pattern that the nervous system finds calming. It mimics the soothing rhythm of breath, heartbeat, or waves. And through this rhythm, your emotional landscape becomes more navigable. Emotions that once felt overwhelming Now move like weather, passing, shifting, changing with each step. This movement also strengthens your connection to the earth. You begin to feel held by the ground, supported without effort. You stop walking on the earth and start walking with it. This restores a sense of belonging, not just as a thought, but as a felt reality. You don't need to be more than you are. You don't need to perform anything. You're simply here, alive, moving, breathing. The simplicity of walking meditation is part of its power. You don't need special knowledge. You don't need to get it right. You bring your attention to your steps, to your breath, to the body in motion. And when the mind wanders, you return, not harshly, just gently, over and over again. This rhythm of returning builds a kind of inner resilience. You stop believing that peace means the absence of thought or emotion. You learn that peace means the ability to return again and again to the body, to the breath, to the step you are taking now. In this way, walking meditation helps integrate other practices. What you see in stillness can now be met in movement. What you touch in silence can now be held in rhythm. The insights that arise while sitting can be lived while walking. It also opens up new ways to relate to space. Instead of moving through the world unconsciously, you begin to notice the details of your surroundings. The sound of leaves, the texture of light, the movement of air. This is not distraction, it's intimacy. You are no longer separate from your environment. You are moving with it, in it, as part of it. The practice doesn't require long hours. Even a few minutes of walking with awareness can reset your energy. It can reconnect you to your body after a difficult conversation, a stressful task, or a long period of mental activity. It becomes a refuge, a way to find your ground again. This practice is especially helpful when emotions feel blocked or unclear. When you don't know what you're feeling or how to name it, the act of walking with presence creates space for the truth to surface naturally. You don't need to dig. You don't need to analyze. You walk, you feel, you listen, and the body tells you what the mind can't. Walking meditation can also be combined with loving kindness or compassion practices. With each step, you can offer a phrase. May I be at ease. May I let go. May I be present. These phrases aren't mantras to force change. They are reminders, gentle companions for the journey. When practiced regularly, walking meditation becomes more than a technique. It becomes a way of life. You begin to carry the same presence into your daily movements, walking through your home, to your car, in the grocery store, at work. Every step becomes a chance to return. Every movement becomes a moment of awareness. And in that return, you find yourself again. Not the version built by stories or roles, but the grounded living awareness that has always been here. The one that breathes quietly beneath the noise. The one that moves without needing to arrive. You also begin to release attachment to speed. In a culture obsessed with getting somewhere, walking slowly on purpose becomes a quiet act of freedom. You stop measuring your worth by how fast you go. You learn to value depth over distance. This teaches patience, not the kind that waits for things to change, but the kind that stays present with what is. It's the patience that says, I don't need to escape. I don't need to rush. I can be here, exactly as I am, and take one step at a time. And that step is enough. Over time, walking meditation becomes a mirror. It shows you how you move through life. Do you rush without noticing? Do you hesitate? Do you carry tension in your stride? These patterns reveal your deeper habits, not just physical, but emotional and mental. And once revealed, they can begin to shift. You walk to release, not by force, but by permission. You give your body the space to let go of what it's been holding. You give your emotions permission to move. You give your mind the chance to settle into the rhythm of presence. There is nothing to achieve, nothing to prove, just one step, one breath, one moment of awareness, repeated over and over until it becomes your way of being. And that way of being, that gentle rhythm, begins to carry you, not just during meditation, but in the rest of your life. It teaches you how to be present in motion, how to release without collapsing, how to stay connected even as everything keeps changing. This is the gift of walking meditation, a return to movement without hurry, a path through the body into healing, a practice of letting go, step by step, breath by breath, until all that remains is awareness in motion, light and free. After learning to walk with awareness, to let the body move what words cannot say, something begins to shift, not just on the surface, but deep in the unseen places within. The steps grow quieter, the breath steadier, and space begins to open. Yet even in that stillness, something doesn't fully release. There's a hesitation, a part of you that clings, not to comfort, but to discomfort, not to healing, but to the wound. It isn't loud, it doesn't shout, it just holds on quietly in the background of every attempt to let go. This is the subtle clinging to suffering. It's one of the most difficult parts of the inner path to face, not because the pain is overwhelming, but because the attachment to pain is hidden. You may feel ready to move on. You may say you want to heal, but when the moment comes to soften completely, to lay down the burden, something in the mind resists. Not consciously, not intentionally, but deeply. To understand this clinging, you first have to see how pain becomes part of identity. When you've carried suffering for a long time, it begins to shape how you see yourself. It becomes familiar, predictable. Even if it's heavy, it gives you something to hold, something to name, something that explains why you feel the way you do. Letting it go can feel like losing yourself. This doesn't mean you enjoy suffering. It means it becomes a framework, a story that defines your life. And the mind, which always seeks stability, would rather keep a familiar pain than risk the unknown of peace, especially if peace feels unfamiliar, foreign, even unsafe. Sometimes suffering becomes a substitute for connection. If you didn't receive care in your pain, you may have learned to cling to it as proof that your experience matters. The pain becomes a protest. Look what I've been through. This is why I am the way I am. And while that truth needs to be acknowledged, it also needs to be witnessed without being grasped. The problem is not pain. Pain is natural. The problem is attachment to pain, the story that it defines you, the fear that if it leaves, you'll be empty, or worse, that you'll have nothing left to say, nothing left to feel, nothing left that explains your depth. This clinging can show up in many ways. The mind returns to past conversations, imagines different outcomes, replays moments of betrayal or abandonment. It analyzes and reanalyzes. It stirs emotions, not to heal them, but to keep them alive. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because it gives you a role, a narrative, a sense of who you are. To dislodge this clinging, you must first meet it without judgment. See it clearly. Name it with honesty, not to shame it, but to understand it. This is where compassion becomes essential, because the moment you try to force the pain to go, it tightens. But when you meet it with gentle awareness, it begins to loosen. Start by asking yourself gently, what does this pain give me? What does it protect me from? What would it mean to live without it? These are not easy questions. They require stillness. They require courage. Because sometimes pain becomes a way to avoid other feelings, like vulnerability, uncertainty, or even joy. Joy can feel dangerous when you've experienced loss. Peace can feel suspicious if you've lived in chaos. The body doesn't trust ease unless it's been practiced. So, we return to presence, not to remove the pain, but to sit beside it, to observe the urge to replay, to reopen, to cling. And in that observation, we begin to separate the pain from the story, the emotion from the identity. You are not what happened to you. You are not your reaction to it. You are not even the wound you carry. You are the awareness that notices it all. From that space, you can hold the pain with love without making it your home. You can let it move through without holding it hostage. You can say, yes, this happened. Yes, it hurt. And now I'm learning to live differently. Sometimes the clinging is reinforced by fear that healing means forgetting, that moving on means the pain didn't matter, that letting go means the person or experience no longer holds meaning. But that's not true healing. Healing doesn't erase the past. It puts it down with reverence. It says, this shaped me, but it does not define me. You honor the story by not being trapped in it. You may also find that suffering becomes a bond in relationships. Shared pain can create closeness. When that pain begins to heal, the connection may shift. This can cause fear. Will I still belong? Will I still be loved? Will I still be understood? Letting go of suffering means learning to connect from a different place, a place not built on shared wounds, but on shared presence. This is a more stable ground. It's not built on pain, it's built on being. In practice, this means watching your language, noticing how often you describe yourself through the lens of old hurt. Catching when you retell the same story, not to process, but to reaffirm your identity. You don't have to erase the story. You just stop clinging to it as who you are. It also means noticing your body. Suffering often hides in muscle tension, posture, breath. When you bring awareness to these areas, through movement, meditation, or mindful touch, you begin to release what's held physically. The release is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's a quiet exhale, a softening of the shoulders, a deeper breath. That's how the clinging begins to ease. This doesn't mean you won't feel pain again. It means you won't hold it the same way. You won't wrap your identity around it. You'll meet it, feel it, and let it pass. Because you trust that peace is not something to fear. That calm is not something to earn. That rest is safe. The practice is not about erasing your past. It's about reclaiming your present. It's about being able to say, this pain visited me. It stayed for a long time, but it is not who I am, and I do not need to carry it forward to prove that it mattered. You may notice resistance rise as you soften. That's okay. The mind is learning new patterns. Be patient. This process is not linear. Some days you'll feel free, others you'll feel tangled again. That's not failure. That's the path. Each time you meet your clinging with awareness, you build trust in your ability to hold yourself. Each time you respond with kindness instead of identification, you strengthen your inner freedom. This is how the subtle clinging to suffering begins to dissolve, not through force, not through rejection, but through loving clarity, through seeing without judgment, through softening without abandoning. And in that softening, something new appears, not because you added anything, but because you finally stopped holding on. Not a version of yourself built around pain, not a story that keeps you small, just the quiet, steady awareness that was never broken, always here, always ready, free. After loosening the grip on pain, after seeing the quiet ways we hold suffering close, another form of attachment slowly becomes clear. It's softer than anger, more subtle than grief. It wears the mask of optimism, yet leaves the heart restless. It tells us things will get better, that answers will come, that life will finally make sense. Just not now, not yet. This is the mind's last stronghold, the place where it hides from the unknown by clinging to what it calls hope. Hope doesn't feel like clinging at first. It feels bright, forward-moving, even necessary. We're taught to rely on it, to believe in it, to hold on to it when things fall apart. But hope can also become a form of resistance. It places your peace in the future. It says, "I'll be okay when things change. I'll rest when I arrive. I'll be free once this ends." And in doing so, it quietly rejects what's here now. This doesn't mean giving up on possibility. It means letting go of the need for certainty, the deep attachment to how things should unfold. Hope, when rooted in expectation, can become just another way to avoid presence. The more the mind leans into what could be, the more it leaves behind what already is. The Buddhist path speaks of something different. Not hopelessness, but freedom from needing hope to feel whole. Not despair, but openness. A state called don't know mind. Don't know mind is not confusion. It's not weakness. It's a posture of humility. It's meeting each moment without forcing it into a story, without needing to predict or control, without tying your happiness to a future outcome. This is one of the most difficult teachings to embody, because the mind is addicted to answers. It finds comfort in knowing. It clings to plans. It wants to shape what comes next. And when life doesn't match the script, suffering grows. Not because the moment is unbearable, but because the expectation has collapsed. Don't know mind breaks the addiction to prediction. It invites you to stop waiting for closure, to stop needing guarantees, to stop living your life through the lens of what might happen. Instead, you open to what is without adding anything extra. You become fully awake to the breath, the sound, the light, the feeling, without rushing it, fixing it, or needing it to change. This openness creates space for real healing. Because most pain is not just about what happened, it's about the layers of resistance built around not knowing what will happen next. The questions that haunt us. Will I be okay? Will they understand? Will this feeling ever leave? Those questions don't bring peace. They bring waiting. They place stillness just out of reach, always one step ahead. But in Don't Know Mind, you pause, you breathe, you acknowledge that you don't have to know, that not knowing is safe, that the moment does not need to be figured out in order to be lived. This mindset dissolves pressure. It removes the demand to always have a direction. It allows for rest, not because everything is resolved, but because resolution is no longer a condition for peace. You may feel the tension rise when certainty slips away. The habit is strong, the urge to plan, to predict, to find something to hold on to. It comes quickly. That's okay. You don't resist the habit, you witness it. You say, "Ah, here's the mind reaching for control again," and then you return to now. You begin to see how often hope was not about healing, but about escape. How often it disguised fear. The fear that this moment might not be enough. The fear that things won't go the way you want. The fear that uncertainty means danger. But not knowing is not danger. It's reality. When you stop fighting it, you realize something powerful. Everything truly alive exists in the unknown. Growth, change, creativity, love, all of it arises from a place that cannot be predicted. The more you open to that space, the more deeply you live. This doesn't mean you stop dreaming or caring. You still make choices, you still show up, but your energy is no longer tied to a specific result. You offer your effort, your presence, your sincerity, and then you let go. You do not carry the weight of needing things to unfold a certain way in order to feel peace. This creates a new kind of confidence, not in knowing what will happen, but in your ability to meet whatever does. That is real freedom, not the freedom to control life, but the freedom to remain whole within it. Don't Know Mind also softens judgment. When you're not constantly evaluating whether life is going right, you stop labeling everything as success or failure. You begin to meet experience directly, not as good or bad, just as it is. You may notice more space in your relationships. You stop needing people to behave a certain way to feel safe. You become less reactive. You listen more. You allow conversations to unfold without trying to manage their direction. You also begin to notice the mind's patterns more clearly. How it seeks certainty in everything, from spiritual progress to daily routines. How it creates tension around timelines and goals. How it tries to control even emotions, hoping they'll pass faster if you manage them just right. But emotions don't need management. They need space. They need presence. They need you to be with them, not to fix them. When you stop needing to know when the pain will end, it begins to soften on its own. This approach brings deep humility. You no longer walk through life pretending to have all the answers. You become more honest. You admit when you don't know. You stop needing to pretend. This makes you more trustworthy, not less, because you're no longer protecting an image. You're living from truth. You also stop expecting permanent solutions. The mind wants a finish line, a final state where nothing hurts and nothing changes. But life doesn't work that way. Even peace moves. Even clarity shifts. Don't Know Mind allows for this. It flows with change instead of fighting it. This doesn't mean becoming passive. You still care. You still make choices, but you're not attached to outcomes. You act with presence and let go of the rest. This is what it means to truly let go of hope, not by becoming numb or indifferent, but by stepping out of the future, by releasing the fantasy that something else, something better, will finally make you whole. You realize you are already whole, even now. And from that wholeness, you live differently. You show up not because of what you expect to get, but because being present is its own reward. You listen because it matters now, not because it will change something later. You rest, not because you've earned it, but because it's what this moment calls for. In Don't Know Mind, healing no longer depends on how things unfold. It becomes a way of relating to each moment with curiosity, with humility, with softness. It says, I don't know what this means, I don't know where this leads, but I'm here for it. And being here is enough. Once you begin to rest in Don't Know Mind, free from needing answers, outcomes, or promises, something deeper begins to settle. The space that was once filled with expectation becomes quiet. But within that quiet, there may still be residue, not in thought, not in logic, but in the heart. Old grief, unfinished stories, pain that has been seen and softened, but not fully released. Sometimes awareness alone is not enough. Sometimes the heart needs a different kind of language to let go, one that speaks through gesture, not explanation, one that gives form to the invisible and allows it to move. This is where ritual begins. Ritual is not superstition. It is not magic. It is embodied meaning. It is a way for the mind and body to meet in action what cannot be fully resolved in thought. Ritual creates a threshold between inner experience and outer expression. It allows what is heavy inside to be placed outside, witnessed, honored, and released. In Buddhism, ritual is not about control. It is about surrender. A form of offering, not to an external force, but to your own sincerity. A way to mark a transition that words cannot reach. Through ritual, the body participates in the healing. The hands move, the breath slows, the elements respond, and something unspoken is allowed to pass. This becomes especially powerful for emotional closure. There are experiences that the mind has accepted, but the heart still holds. The death of a relationship, a betrayal that left no space for goodbye, a version of yourself that no longer exists. These stories may not demand more talking. They may not need more understanding. What they need is release. Buddhist ceremonies offer a sacred space for this kind of release. They create a container, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Not just symbolically, but energetically. They allow the whole being to say, "This is done." And in that saying, to step forward, unburdened. One of the most meaningful forms of ritual release is the water puja. This practice is used across many Buddhist traditions. It involves making offerings to the water, often as an act of purification, forgiveness, or letting go. Water symbolizes flow, impermanence, cleansing. During the ceremony, participants pour water slowly while reciting prayers or intentions. The act is simple, but deeply felt. As the water flows, so too does the energy of what is being released. The water carries the weight away, not because the problem disappears, but because the attachment begins to loosen. You watch it leave your hands. You feel the shift in your body. You offer it to something larger than yourself, the earth, the lineage, the silence, and you walk away lighter. Another powerful ritual is the fire offering. This practice uses fire as a medium for transformation. Fire consumes, it changes form, it leaves nothing untouched. In a fire puja, written intentions, symbolic items, or visualizations of what you're releasing are offered into the flames. The fire receives them without judgment. It does not analyze or advise. It simply takes what is given and turns it to ash. The act of burning something intentionally creates a physical sensation of closure. There's heat, there's movement, there's finality. The body understands what the mind still wrestles with. This no longer needs to be carried. These rituals are not about performance. They are not about getting it right. They are about presence. You don't need to know ancient chants. You don't need elaborate tools. The power comes from sincerity, from showing up fully, from allowing the act to be sacred, not because it is fancy, but because it is real. This is the essence of ritual, reality made visible. There are smaller rituals too, daily practices that mark emotional boundaries. Lighting a candle each morning with a clear intention, bowing to the cushion before meditation, touching the earth with your hand before going to sleep. These are not habits. They are containers. They remind the mind and body to pause, to honor, to shift states. Even writing can become ritual. A letter never sent, a journal page burned after writing, a poem written as a goodbye. The act of creating something, offering it, and then letting it go. This makes space for energy to move. What was stuck finds a channel. What was buried is brought to the surface, not to stay, but to be seen and released. Ritual also brings community into healing. In many Buddhist cultures, ceremonies are done in groups. Grief is not carried alone. Letting go is witnessed. Others hold space. They offer chants, presence, silence, and in that shared space, something opens. You remember you are not the only one releasing, not the only one starting over. You are not alone in the process. The communal aspect can be deeply healing for wounds that feel isolating, for those who were never given permission to express grief, for those whose pain was never seen. To sit in circle, to offer your intention out loud or in silence, and to be met with shared breath, that itself is a form of release. These rituals don't need to be rare. They don't need to be reserved for big events. They can become part of your life rhythm, a way to mark emotional seasons, a way to step into new chapters with clarity, a way to gently say, "I'm ready to let this go now." Ritual also reminds you that letting go is not always instant. Sometimes you return again and again to the same offering, not because it didn't work, but because layers are being released. Each time you return, something new leaves, something deeper is touched. You meet yourself again, not in failure, but in honesty. There is a humility in this process, a tenderness. You stop demanding closure from the mind and begin allowing it through the body, through presence, through ritual action. This is especially useful when closure is not possible in the outer world, when the person is gone, when the situation cannot be changed, when the words cannot be said. The ritual allows the release to happen within you. It shifts the energy from stuck to moving, from circling to releasing. Even the act of bowing, one of the most common rituals in Buddhism, can be a powerful gesture of release. A bow says, "I let go of control. I honor what is. I offer this moment fully." It's not submission. It's surrender to what cannot be changed. And in that surrender, peace begins to return. Rituals speak in a language older than logic. They meet parts of us that words cannot reach. They offer structure where there is chaos. They offer rhythm where there is pain. And most importantly, they remind us that healing is not only mental, it is spiritual, emotional, physical, and relational. They teach us that release is not forgetting. It is remembering differently, remembering without clinging, remembering with love, without needing to hold. Through ritual, you practice the art of goodbye, not as abandonment, but as an act of love. You say, "This mattered, this shaped me, and now I release it to the fire, to the water, to the silence." And in doing so, you step forward. Not because you've erased the past, but because you've integrated it. You've honored it. And you've decided that the present moment is wide enough to hold new life, new breath, new space. This is the power of ritual. It transforms not by changing what happened, but by changing your relationship to it. It turns pain into prayer. It turns memory into offering. It turns holding into release. And in that release, a new path quietly appears. Not the path of forgetting, not the path of perfection, but the path of freedom. One step, one breath, one sacred act at a time.